in on what's going on.
Ooh, what's going on? So many things are going. I've been here in Mexico for the last 4 days or so. Can you hear me, everybody?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, great. And it's great. I got to explore a little bit, but it's also kind of an interesting reminder of the different realities that we all live in. And I am so grateful of all the beautiful resources that we have and the ability that we have to support the efforts like Hika babies and all those that are trying to keep our states and our planets in a manageable state. This is certainly not what a lot of it, like the example I'm giving is that Guadalajara has been losing a lot of its nature in the last 5 years, a pretty alarming amount. And it has to do with so many interests there that it's really, really sad to see how a large metropole can start seeing its resources decay. So it makes me very happy and honored to be in this space in which we can do what we can to make our state as beautiful and keep it as it is. So that's my report.
Mauricio, thank you for that. And we really appreciate you making the effort to join us. Mark Labhart, how are you doing?
Doing well, Carl. Thanks. Fairly short report. That mountain behind me, I wish I could see it today, but I can't because it's so smoky. It's really, really bad here today in Central Oregon as a result of that Cedar Creek fire. I sure hope they get a handle on that pretty soon. I'm a little bit sad and a little bit happy, but Srishti will probably tell you about it, but happy she's got a fantastic, great new job, but sad to see her leaving Defenders. So I sent her a little note the other day so maybe she can tell us about that. So the rest of you know that she's got a great opportunity. I'm looking forward to today's meeting. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. I'm going to preempt everyone's thoughts, and Srishti is not leaving us. I had the same horrible thought when she told me I dropped my fork when she told me she was leaving Defender. And I'm happy to say that she's still going to join us. So Srishti, why don't you let us know what's up?
Absolutely, Carl. And thank you, Commissioner Labhart, for your really, really thoughtful note. This last week has been a week where I'm like, okay, why am I leaving? Because everybody's written such sweet notes and I'm like, oh, this is the hard part. But I do have a great opportunity. I am going to be moving on to Western Environmental Law Center, which is a sort of regional organization working on the western side of the country, primarily litigation-based advocacy, but also a little bit of community-based collaborative work in the region. And so I'll be joining as their deputy director starting November. I'm leaving Defenders on September 20th, so like a week away now. But I am taking a month break in between just for like a healthy mental reset as I switch jobs. I'm looking forward to my new adventure, really sad to be leaving my current adventure. But also, as Carl mentioned, I am not planning on leaving OCRF. I'll definitely be talking with my current employer about the importance of this work and why I would like to continue. And I was actually able to break this news to Carl in person because I was in Southern Oregon last week for my last fieldwork trip with Defenders, and Carl was very gracious to invite me over to his place for dinner. I got to see the amazing wetland restoration work that he's been doing, all the birds that have made that their home now. It's insane, the number of species diversity in that small area. So it's very encouraging to see and really amazed with all the hard work that Carl has put into that particular wetland restoration. And I don't know how Carl gets any work done with that view out of his living room. So I saw a very pretty sunset, and I am really, really surprised that he's active at any given hour of the day in front of a computer. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Carl.
Srishti, thanks for that. I'm looking out my window right now, so it's okay. It was great having Srishti here, and I really appreciated her coming. Like showing off Klamath Falls. There's a lot more to it than a lot of people know. Kelly, I was just at the coast. You're a lucky woman. How are you doing?
Well, I'm good. And luckily, Jane was just at the coast too. So I had breakfast with her and Mark this morning, which was awesome. We got to meet up in Port Orford. It was really funny. Jane might even tell the story, but was eating at a restaurant in town. And she said, you know, if you put your phone number on a poster that anybody can call you. So it was like a restoration poster. And I had my name, call with questions, you know, so she got a hold of me that way, which was super fun. But yeah, otherwise, my husband is finally back from the Rum Creek fire. So I'm really stoked on that. He's been gone for 2 weeks. And so huge help. All shout outs to single parents out there. That's an insane job. So I'm happy to have him home, and I'm happy that one's sort of half contained. And I'm like Mark, I'm watching out for that Cedar Creek fire now. So, and I'm happy to be here.
Well, thanks. We're happy you're here as well. It's too bad we're having to deal with these fires all over the place. Jane, what are you doing at the coast?
Let me unmute here. Well, I've been down here for almost a week, and I went to a Nature Conservancy meeting and toured some sites with the Wild Rivers Land Trust, and just have had a great time, really enjoying the coastal ecosystems and seeing the plants here. That I know the plants, but to see them in such profusion in their native setting is just gorgeous. So I've enjoyed it a lot.
Well, thanks, Jane. You know, I think you all know Jane and her husband, Mark, are involved in conservation all across the state. They're doing wonderful things, and we're going to hear about a project later on today that they're both deeply involved in. Mark Stern, I know you've been traveling. What's up?
Yeah, hi everybody. We were up in the Gulf Islands last week, which was in between Vancouver and Vancouver Island, and taking in the water, the wildlife, the birds. Had a really strong north wind, so the paddling wasn't as good as we thought it might be, but it was just really nice to be up there. And you could sure see all the smoke just as it settled in along the west coast of Washington State there, and the Cascades driving back down to Portland the other night. So glad that we got a little rain last night, and hope the fires and the smoke abate for everybody's sake.
We actually had a little bit of rain in Klamath Falls. It was like, what is this stuff coming down from the sky? We had that this morning. Charlotte, I know you've been working really hard. I think all of y'all have been able to see the stuff she sent out and how she's organized things behind the scenes. So I don't know if she's had time to do anything fun in the last week or two, but so what's up with you, Charlotte?
Actually, I did. My husband planned a fun 13th wedding anniversary present, and I spent the night at Hika Head Lighthouse at that historic inn. So had a nice fancy weekend, pretended to be adults, left my little one at home with my mom. So that was a nice fun weekend, but obviously excited to be back here with you and show all the work we've been doing.
Great. Well, congratulations, Charlotte. That's sounds like a great anniversary. Well, I too was at the coast. I went to Coos Bay and tried to get away from the 98-degree heat here. It was 76 and quite nice, but blowing hard. We got 48 crabs in 2 days, so we did really well despite the wind, and just had a really nice time. Okay, well, I think I got everybody on the committee, and we're really glad to have you all here with us. So I think we'll just go with the agenda. The first step, of course, is to approve the minutes. Charlotte, do you have
Yes, I do have some slides. I will, with your permission, pause us just to read off the members of the public on the call for the record before we move into the minutes.
Please do.
So I will once again apologize if I pronounce your last name incorrectly. So we have Kelly Biaz, James Frazier, Ken McCall, Molly Hanna, I would ask the Oregon Wildlife Coalition member to put your name, or if you can speak it out now, because I don't see an actual name associated with that.
I think that might have been my account, Charlotte, because I managed the 2 Zooms and I changed mine, but it may not, I don't know if another coalition member is here. I don't see though.
Okay, perfect. Then I can make sure I make that correction. And Mark Hudson, and from ODFW, we also have Sarah Reifus staff. So I think with that, I will go on to the approving the meeting minutes. Let's see if we can share my screen. Oops. Carl, are you able to see the screen? You are muted.
Yeah, it's not the minutes
No, I
motion.
am just about to go.
There we go.
So for today, we have 2 sets of minutes, hopefully for your consideration. We have the meeting minutes from July 13th. We also have the August 1st workshop minutes. So I would ask the chair to maybe guide us through the 2 sets of motions, as we will make them separately.
Yeah, Charlotte set all those out, and I hope you all had a chance to review it. So do we have a motion to approve the July 13th minutes?
I would make that motion since I was not at the August meeting. I move to approve the July 13th, 2022 meeting minutes with the continued authority to correct spelling, grammar, and punctuation.
And I will second that.
Great. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Hands up. I'm going to assume Mauricio's hand is up behind that beautiful picture of him. Okay, so that passed. So then do you have, here's the second one. I was also not at the August 1st workshop. Is there someone that can move about the August 1st workshop summary?
Yeah, I can with one. My name was misspelled, but assuming that gets correct, I would go forward and I move to approve the August 1st, 2022 workshop summary with the continued authority to correct spelling, grammar, and punctuation.
I second.
Okay, we have a second. So all in favor, thumbs up. Now I can see Mauricio. We're good.
Perfect, and apologies for that, Mark. I will make sure with your motion, I will correct that before that is posted.
Super, thanks.
All right. Charlotte, is there anything else before we move on with the updates?
No, we have nothing else to continue here. For the next section, which is agenda item 2, the staff and chair updates, I will go through a series of 4 updates through our objectives, and then I will pass it to the chair to kind of round out this section with some updates then.
Su atención, por favor. Le recordamos que el uso de cubrebocas es obligatorio dentro del
Hearing
edificio de
none.
Mauricio, you ought to, Mauricio, can you mute?
Yes, of course, sorry.
Y respetar la sana distancia. Your attention, please. We remind you the use of face.
I think that's you. Yeah, there we go. All right.
All right, so just so that we gave a brief overview, kind of in addition to the meeting summary notes that you have received on the drought planning workshop, we did have this workshop. It was very well viewed online. The format for this, just as a reminder, is that we had a small Zoom discussion with OCRF members and other agency members. And then this workshop was live streamed and also recorded for members of the public. Since then, we've had 170 views of the workshop when I made this presentation. So that was a couple weeks ago. Since then, we've had a few more. And one of the key really takeaways of this workshop is this was really meant to be a starting place for us to start to strategize how we want to consider moving forward with the drought funding, what are priorities, what are follow-ups we want to do with the various agencies. And just, there was many takeaways from this, but 2 I just kind of want to highlight here for continued work with ODFW staff was the OCRF members really did have an interest in trying to get more prioritized list of some of the focal species and habitats from the Oregon Conservation Strategy that would really benefit from some targeted drought funding. And there was also a continued interest in kind of thinking about prioritization of beaver projects and also just larger project in preparation for the private forest accord funding that are coming through. There was really kind of a sense that this OCRF drought funding would really be kind of a jumping off place or leverage place for private forest accord projects to move forward with. So there is going to be further follow-up. I would maybe pause here and ask any of the members of the OCRF that were present to provide any sort of additional updates or takeaways, but we will be dedicating quite a bit of time at our October 3rd meeting to following up with this and really getting some more information from the staff on those 2 bullets and other things.
Does anyone that was there have a comment? Well, I was not there, and I have a comment. As Charlotte put on there, under the takeaways, there's sort of a prioritization of beaver-related projects. I think there's getting to be more and more recognition of the value of beaver-related restoration in terms of drought and water. I don't know if you all saw, there was a really nice article in New York Times just came out about a rancher in Wyoming. It's kind of embraced the whole beaver thing, and it's kind of transformed his ranch, improved forage, improved water. It was a really great article. I think that that is a direction I want us all to be thinking about, and how OCRF can tie into that concept, especially with the private forest accord. There's going to be a lot of funding available. This has been an interest of mine for some time, just because it seemed to me to be a really nice mechanism to address a lot of the issues that Oregon is confronted with, especially on the east side, but also the west side. And one last thing, I had the great pleasure of rafting the John Day this spring with a bunch of folks from when I was on, that I knew on the OEB board. And one of those people lives right there in Condon and has been heavily involved in the beaver restoration. Apparently some of the very first projects with beaver dam analogs and trying to improve habitat so beaver would occupy the space, that happened on the John Day. And some of that work is 20 years old now. And I told her of my interest, and she took it upon herself to set up a tour for me to come back there and meet with a bunch of the biologists. There's one of the soil and conservation workers who's really been deeply involved. And this is going to happen in October. If any of you have any interest in joining me, it would be great. It looks like it's going to be the 16th, 17th, and 18th. We're going to stay at the Condon Hotel, which is just an amazing hotel in downtown Condon. She's got a barbecue set up. This is just an informal thing. And I thought if any of you would be interested in coming out there and join us, it'd be great. So consider that an informal invitation. So that's my comments on beavers. Back at you, Charlotte.
Great. Are there any other comments from members of the board? Okay, hearing none. Carl, with your permission, we do actually have a member of the public who has viewed this and would like to share a comment here that is directed specifically at the workshop. Are you comfortable with that, or would you like that held?
No, I think that's fine.
Okay, James, would you like to provide your comment?
Sure, yes, thank you for the time. Chair Wenner, Vice Chair Valadrian, and members of the advisory committee. My name is James Fraser, and I'm the Oregon Policy Advisor at Trout Unlimited. Thank you for the time to provide just a couple remarks here. TU is one of the 6 groups that advocated for the drought resilience package funding that OCRF received from the 2022 short session. And I watched the August 1st meeting and just wanted to provide a brief public comment today and follow up. Overall, TU agrees with the 2 takeaways in Charlotte's notes. I think there was a lot of productive conversation and creative thinking during the meeting. And I applaud the advisory committee for putting it all together. There were just a couple things that I wanted to highlight or emphasize for the rest of the committee based on the discussion. The first is that when it comes to prioritizing spending for the $4 million received during the session, Trout Unlimited would just encourage OCRF to not lose focus on projects that have a nexus to rivers, aquatic habitats, and aquatic species. OCRF is doing a great job of getting money out the door quickly for projects statewide that restore habitats and educate people about the natural world in Oregon. And that's exactly why we advocated for sending this funding to OCRF. But when it comes to the question of how to prioritize that funding, we would just respectfully say yes as to drought generally, but also more specifically, please spend it as much as possible on aquatic habitat and species work. And I think that brings me to my second point, which is I really like the discussion about how there are groupings of species that tend to benefit from the same types of projects. Several times on the first, folks talked about how projects that benefit beavers also benefit salmonids, and that's reflected in Charlotte's notes. But I just wanted to also point out that, of course, there are similar parallels between amphibians and salmonids. So I'd encourage OCRF to continue with that line of thinking about how a single funding allocation might benefit multiple species, whether restoration, research, or monitoring. I think just two other things. One is there's an opportunity that I heard loud and clear on that meeting that other agencies have gaps in their funding authorities, and OCRF can really step up in those areas. Key among those, I think, are the data gaps in species needs and habitat use and understanding what those are, but also needs for water temperature and flow targets. So I just wanted to share that an example of how OCRF could move forward on this would be to lay the groundwork for future in-stream flow restoration or habitat projects, especially including funding that's going to come to OCRF from the Private Forest Accord. So, for example, funding research that the other state agencies can't do or don't have the capacity to do. My last thought was just that I like the point about how OCRF can use a portion of the drought funds to lay the groundwork for funding that's soon going to come to OCRF from the PFA. ODFW has been doing similar work with the funding received for the fish passage barrier removal work that the agency received during the session, basically using the current funds to not just remove barriers, doing the brick and mortar work, but also paying for the engineering plans and other preparation for the federal infrastructure dollars that are soon going to arrive. And in the same way, I think OCRF could use the drought funds to prepare for the incoming PFA funding to identify what the PFA related species need and how CRF can best fund projects related to them moving forward. So Trout Unlimited appreciates this chance to provide input on next steps for funding in this area. And thanks. Let me know if you have any questions.
Mark's turn.
Yeah, James, thank you. That was really helpful input and reflection there. I guess a thought as you shared some of that, and I was thinking about it before anyway, was how would you distinguish in between projects that maybe might be most appropriately funded by OWEB, which has a much bigger funding base than OCRF relative to what OCRF could focus on that OWEB maybe can't focus on? Because some of your comments about data gaps, water quality monitoring, those sorts of things, in-stream flow, some of that maybe is more appropriate for OWEB or maybe not. I guess I'm interested in just how you see that playing field.
Sure. Yeah, James Fraser for the record. Great points. I think there's two differences. There's the funding size. I believe until now, OCRF has largely been dealing with the maximum of $50,000 in project spending. The projects that OWEB is already dealing with tend to be quite a bit larger. And of course, they also have existing programs. So for example, during the short session, OWEB received $10 million for voluntary water acquisitions, and OWEB already has a land and water acquisitions program. Those tend to be pretty large dollar projects, and I don't expect that OCRF would be doing things like participating much in voluntary water right acquisitions or other changes to folks' water rights, because OWEB already funds a lot of that work. But when it comes to understanding where there are key needs for flow restoration, projects, or whether there may be, species that their flow needs aren't as well understood. That could be a place where OCRF could, send $40,000 or $50,000 to someone that has a research project to learn what those things are, so that the groups like TU and others that do these big flow restoration deals can use that information in, figuring out where to apply for. So I don't see any of this input as being intended to take work away from OWEB, but just to supplement the areas that OWEB has funding to direct, but they have gaps in what they can spend funds on. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks, James.
And if I may, from a staff perspective, since that workshop, I have continued to coordinate pretty in depth with the OWEB staff, and they're actually helping to promote our next RFP as OCRF. And we are starting to coordinate and kind of seeing if there's projects that come to one table or another, and help coordinate with the applicant if it's a better fit, potentially to go over to OWEB, or OWEB is also actively kind of funneling projects our way. So I think that there's multiple ways to think about this, not just structurally, but also just on a program standpoint where we can help coordinate some of that.
Mauricio, do you have a question?
Not a question, but more of a little bit of a comment based on what James was bringing, which I think would be really interesting. And I don't know when would be appropriate to bring it up, or if it is something that could be discussed at some point in the near future. But I like the idea of having as an additional criteria adjacent benefit to either a species or habitats in the way in which we evaluate general projects. Meaning, if let's say the staff says, as this project is coming in, we foresee that it could have a parallel benefit to this other species, and there'd be that an additional point of for us to consider as these projects move through. I don't know if that we have that as a consideration yet, but I would like to see something like that.
Thank you, Mauricio. That's a thoughtful approach, and certainly as moving forward, that's the most bang for the buck. Partly that's one of the reasons a lot of the beaver related stuff is interesting to me. Beavers is in the name, but it's really not about beavers. It's about all the other stuff and all the other species that they benefit. James, your comments are really helpful, and we really value TU's partnership and your input, and appreciate what you did to get us this funding. So again, don't hesitate to continue to give us feedback and advice. We might not always take it, but we're happy to get it. So thank you very much for everything that you've done for us. So, and thank you for your very insightful comments. Any other comments on that? Okay, Charlotte, why don't you move forward?
Great, thank you. So just a couple quick updates. So as I mentioned, we do have our current RFP open. We opened that on August 12th. We had our first informational on August 29th. So just as an FYI, these informationals are a new part of the process that we are doing, and really there to help applicants get a better sense of what we're looking for and guide individuals through our application process. So this was over an hour kind of webinar that I hosted. We had 26 people attend it. This has been recorded and posted on our website. And it really was not only just us walking through the website for the OCRF, walking through the application, walking through our expenditure framework, but also walking through the updated scoring rubric that you guys approved, months ago now. So really helping applicants understand what are we looking for, how are we looking for it, and then going through some more specific questions. So I do have another informational session that will be on September 19th. This one will be kind of more of a straight Q&A, and then I can dive into specific questions as people are interested in it. We will close the RFP formally on October 7th, but between now and October 7th, we'll send out a couple more reminders, and specifically one on October 3rd, just really trying to make sure people are aware that there's an upcoming close of our RFP, what we're looking for. At this point, we have no applications completed online, but we have many started. So that is a good thing, but I wouldn't expect any in quite this early. but I think we're going to have a very good turnout this time around. So great for us to kind of have a wide range to look at, but I would maybe prepare the committee that we're going to have, once again, a lot of projects to look at. So I will pause there if there is any questions on our current RFP that is open. Okay, hearing none. I'll move on to the next thing. We are currently still trying to find our last two OCRF advisory member positions in the Northern Basin and Range and the Columbia Plateau and Blue Mountains. We do have some interested applicants in, and I have one in particular. I'm helping them work through their application for online. Really just would make a public announcement that the last time that we're going to be able to accept applications during this administration of the governor will be before October 5th. So really we need those applications in the door pretty early. The reason for that is that the appointments, the executive appointments office will no longer be really having the capacity to review applications after really this deadline of early October. So if you know anyone else that is interested that hasn't reached out and started this process, please, please, please have them do so that we are able to fill out these last two seats, not only to have the perspectives and interests of these seats filled, but more capacity on the advisory committee. In addition, that there will be a lag before the new administration, before they will be accepting applications. So there is a very high likelihood that if we are unable to fill one or both of these seats this October round, we won't have the opportunity to consider applications again till most likely next March, if not later. So are there any thoughts or questions on this before I go into the last agenda item that I will do before I pass it to the chair? Okay. Hearing none. I am crossing my fingers and going to ask for any sort of last minute comments that we have finally nailed down a in-person meeting. I would like my crown mailed to me just so that I can do scheduling, but looks like November 29th in person in Salem. I am aware that at least one of you might not be able to attend in person, but we can get you on for Skype. But I'm going to pause and let the members of the OCRF Advisory Committee that are present, please do not tell me you are not available. Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up. I do know one of you won't be able to make it, but at this point, I am claiming this date. I will be starting logistics. Do be prepared that if you need travel time, we'll be able to have a hotel room for you the Monday before and obviously the night of. This will be a full day meeting, so please be prepared to stay the entire day. It's going to be a pretty in-depth meeting. And as always, this meeting will be open to the public. I will be providing public some kind of meeting logistics as we get closer, but I have claimed this day, hopefully in your agendas. I will work with you on logistics, but I do want to make sure that you are aware I'm going to still need a couple extra days from my advisory committee. October 3rd will be a full meeting. November 7th will be a full meeting, but I am going to, although it's literally a week after, I am going to need still your time on December 5th for an hour. This will be shortened because this will be when you select your projects. So we'll pause here. And maybe ask the chair or any of the members if you have any questions. Okay.
Charlotte, I just want to make an observation. You know, the OCRF has been a digital experience for all of us, and it's been remarkable. It's been incredible, I think. I mean, the fact that we have Mauricio participating from Guadalajara, it just shows the power of that. And we're extremely fortunate that the technology evolved at about the time we needed it. So I think that is who we are. It's what we're used to. And it's going to be a big part of the future. But I also think it's really, really important for us to meet in person I think there's a lot more that can happen. It was pretty magical when we had that event in Portland. And I just really encourage all of y'all to look forward to participating, and we'll get a lot out of it. So I'm myself personally and really looking forward to it. And I appreciate Charlotte running the trap lines on this one and finding a time that will work for everybody. So I look forward to seeing y'all then.
Great, thank you. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen. Carl, you do have one announcement, and then we are going to pass it to Hika Baby for their presentation and get them started in just a few minutes.
Sure. So I think Charlotte's what she's alluding to is the you all are aware of the private forest accord and how the OCRF was chosen to be the recipient of that funding. The structure of that as it came out is there's going to be a committee, a separate committee from this committee that is going to oversee that funding. But we do have a spot on that committee, a really important one. And the intention is that this is very tightly coordinated, that what the private forest accord folks do and what we do. I think the most effective way for the dollars we spend will be if we are very tight in our coordination and how we are working together. So that's going to be very important, that we have a lot of communication, and the person that takes that role is really key. So Kurt Melcher contacted me not long ago saying one of the things he was going to try to do is make it so that the chair of the OCRF could appoint that person rather than have the governor appoint that position. And he was successful in that effort. And so that fell to me to appoint the individual from our committee. I've talked to many of you about this, but very early on, Mark Stern expressed a strong interest in doing this. I think he may at times have second thoughts about it when he realizes all the work that's going to go into it. But he has expressed that interest, and those of you I've talked to strongly supported him, and I certainly do. So at this point, I'm just announcing that Mark will be the representative for the OCRF to the Private Forest Accord Committee, a really important position, and we really appreciate you taking that on, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. It's I've tracked it since before OCRF started and through its sort of evolution and development, and I think it's a lot of opportunity there to benefit Oregon's conservation at large, including private forest lands and riparian areas. So seems like a great connection to OCRF, and looking forward to being part of that. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, it looks like we got some thumbs up from the audience as well. So that's great, Mark. Good luck with it. It's going to be, I think, really rewarding, but it'll be a lot of work. So thanks for taking that on.
Yeah, thank you.
And with that, if I may, Carl, and I would actually add on, obviously Mark is going to stay on the OCRF and be kind of our touch point for the private forest accord, in addition to the DFW staff. So obviously we'll have lots of updates as that group kind of gets going, which will be pretty rapidly this, end of fall, beginning of winter.
This is the beginning of Mark's career as the Mark Labhart of the OCRF. He's going to be part of everything.
I'll hang out with Mark anytime.
Excellent. So maybe with that, Carl, would you like to introduce our guest presentation, or would you like me to?
Go right ahead, Charlotte.
All right, so I am very excited to have the Hika Baby group come with their presentation. They've just finished up their project and provided us a project summary, which the advisory committee received in their meeting material packets. This was a grant that was awarded in round 3 of your funding cycle, and it's a really cool one. So with that, I may ask Kayla or Jessica, I know you sent me your slides early, but would you like to see if you can take control of the screen and present on your end? If not, I can pull up your slides.
Yeah, Kayla can share and I will do the talking if that's all right.
Excellent. So I'm seeing someone's screen. Okay, perfect.
All right, and just to introduce myself, I'm Jessica Carrillo-Alator. I'm the Executive Director for Hika Baby. I also have Kayla Klein here, our Director of Programs. And hopefully you guys got a chance to take a look at this information or can look at it later when you do have time. But basically, we wanted to share a little bit more about the project that we did. We received $20,000 in funding from OCRF, and that was really, really helpful in helping us really get our Bring It Outside series running in Gresham. It helped us really build our partnerships and grow our partnerships with a lot of community organizations in the area so that we could reach out and support BIPOC families, especially immigrant and refugee and Latinx families, and help them get outside and enjoy the spaces in their neighborhoods. We took them to Nadaka Nature Park and we trained several facilitators from the community to really make sure that we were getting people who understood the audience that we were trying to work with and could connect with them more authentically. And those facilitators got a whole bunch of information. They got a workbook themselves. They got some hands-on training with us and our staff team. And then they were able to kind of customize each workshop as families showed up and tailor it to who was there, what ages showed up. And that was a really key learning thing for us to be able to adapt and grow this programming and see that we could take something that was a pretty prescribed activity and make it a little bit more able to fit to the size of what audience showed up. Another thing that was really helpful to us was being able to deepen the relationships with the organizations we were already working with, like Familias en Acción and Northwest Family Services. We also got to grow a new partnership with the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization here in Portland. And we worked specifically with the Greater Middle Eastern Community Group from there and brought several families to our wrap-up event in Nadaka and served them lunch and did several activities with them, had a lot of fun picnic moments. And one of the things that stood out to me was just watching families get a chance to interact and do the activities that they wanted to in an outdoor space. So watching groups of adults and teens get together and play soccer, or watching several generations from grandparents down to toddlers sit on a picnic blanket together in the shade and just enjoy a peaceful moment together, especially for a community that a lot of these are Afghan refugees who are just trying to get into our community and get settled and connected. So to be able to really reach out and give them that welcoming experience felt very meaningful. And it's also sparked in our relationship with IRCO the need to really do more of this with that community, especially for people who aren't necessarily familiar with Oregon, but they're trying to acclimatize to the area and they're trying to understand how to get outside and how to do it in a safe way with little ones. They're looking for more support to do that. So I think some long-term impacts can grow from that. Our wrap-up event was really great. We had the Oregon Zoo, Nurturely, which is an organization that helps postpartum parents with getting outside and baby wearing. We had Northwest Family Vacation, IRCO, of course, was there, City of Gresham, Northwest Family Services, Familias en Acción, and then we had prize and sponsor support from Burley, Athletic Brewing, Anya Baby Carriers, 50/50 donated water bottles, Teton Sports donated backpacks, Merrill donated shoes, and Rumpel donated basically like quick dry towels for families, so they had something to sit on and could continue to take that gear and use it for future things. We were able to develop our resources in a couple different languages. We focused on Spanish. We would like to, as we grow this, do more in Arabic, because that is an audience that definitely has expressed an interest in that. And we now have a relationship to do more of that. We really just need the funding and support. And then the last piece of this was our Hika Baby Portland Story Map, which is a Spanish resource for families. And it shows several different locations in the greater Portland area that are accessible by public transportation, family friendly, and has like a little snapshot of what a family can expect there. And then this resource that shows them where it is and how to get there, so that they can continue exploring and spending more time outside. So at this point, if you guys have any questions, I'd love to answer questions, or if there's something you're specifically interested in knowing more about.
Mark Stern.
Yeah, Kayla, thanks for the presentation and the update. They're really well put together and shared. And I like the report that you had provided to Charlotte too. That was really helpful to read. So it just sounded really well organized, and you touched on a lot of people and brought people together and getting into the outdoors. So I was really impressed with your presentation and what you provided here. But the one curious I had is, I know you had a graph that sort of showed the different demographics of the groups that you engaged. I just wondered if you had a rough number of how many people were involved and maybe what their age demographics were.
Yeah, so we served over 30 families, which was quite a broad spectrum. At our big wrap-up event, we served, there were over 50 people there, and they ranged from newborn babies all the way up to grandparents in their senior years. And we also had, I think, Kayla, can you speak to the families that showed up there for our workshops a little bit more?
Workshops were more centered around that newborn to 5-year-old. With always, we welcome siblings. We know that families don't necessarily have the space, especially during summer, to find other childcare. So our workshops and our facilitation of the programming is focused on the 0 to 5. And I say probably the average participant was 3 years old.
Yeah, great. Getting them early.
Yes, that's our mission.
Mark Lauhart.
Yeah, thanks for the summary. That was very impressive. I probably am not up to speed as I should be. Could you tell me how or who thought up this idea and, you know, to put it into play, and, you know, bringing up a brand new notion like this and Hike It Baby, and then trying to put it all together? Who thought of this, and how did that come about? First question. I have another one too.
Yeah, so our founder, Shanti Hodges, really gave birth to this idea right after she had her son and was trying to figure out how to get outside and feel confident and comfortable and find a sense of community. And Kayla and I have both been a huge part of the organization since the early years. And we were moms who were also looking for community and trying to find ways to get outside. And then this kind of newer evolution of programming has really come from us reflecting on the fact that we've had so much benefit from getting outside that we really want to make sure as many families as possible get this opportunity, and knowing that especially in those early years, there's not a lot of support out there. There's a lot of fear around getting outside with a newborn, but it's something that's so good for both the parent and the child to do. And if we can create more positive interactions for people, we really can help build that lifelong love of nature. And then hopefully that translates into more people who want to take care of and protect the planet as well.
Anything to add, Kayla?
Just that the bio program is specifically centered on removing those barriers, and we like to do that through listening, learning, and supporting. And that's just really connecting with the communities that we're reaching and making them comfortable outside.
Okay, second question. So now that you've had some seed money and donations and those kind of things and got it off the ground and see the success of it, what are your challenges to keep it going? And how are you working to keep this effort going? So it appears to be a pretty good success, and need to make sure that this effort keeps going.
Yeah, I think one of our big challenges is definitely funding and trying to find more opportunities to just have the time to build the partnerships, because organizations like IRCO, for example, really understand that there's a need for this, but both IRCO and Hika Baby need that funding to kind of help them spend the time to talk about how we can better tailor what we do to that specific community's needs. And so just having organizations and different funding sources that understand that spending that time building that relationship is just as important as paying for the bus to get the families out there. So that's something that I think we really face. And then Kayla, as our Director of Programs, were there any specific challenges you'd like to see more help with?
Just the continuance. We talked a lot about the pipeline when we applied for the grant, and that is always something that we'll continuously work on. And I think the story maps help a lot in continuing to get these families outside. I see in the future us doing more training type, where we're taking the IRCO or partners or our community partners like IRCO, and we're training them to facilitate these programs for each new set of families that come to the United States, and showing them the ropes and supporting them and providing the gear and resources and all that cool stuff in their native language too. I think that's another key component that we're focusing on as well.
Yeah, there's nothing better than showing families that come from other countries what a great resource we have here in the state of Oregon to get into the outdoors. So congratulations on your good work.
Thank you.
Great questions, Mark. Mauricio, am I correct in that you have a connection with Hika Baby?
I do, yes. I was actually the chair of the organization for a few years. And I'm just so proud of everything that we've accomplished. Some of the things that maybe were so. One of the things that maybe Jessica didn't touch upon is the organization truly went through a transformation. They discovered that for the longest time, they were speaking to a very specific audience, if the intention is to make it so that every family has the opportunity to connect with the natural world and with each other outside. We really need to expand the way in which we honor the connections that many communities already have with nature. And they really went through a really amazing process of self-discovery. And what you see here is really the product of that self-discovery. We need to stop asking people to come to the public lands and parks. Sorry about the little airport sound. So sorry about that. Probably you could refresh your Spanish a little bit. So my point being that we have to find them where they are, in their neighborhoods, in their parks. And once you see them, when they get the gear that is being donated, when they participate in the activities that they host, we actually had some of these community organization leaders come up to us nobody has actually approached us to do this before. And why is it that nobody has thought about this before? And so that's why organizations like Hika Baby are so key, and to start making connections. Stop thinking about what it would look like to do it right, but just getting those families outside, helping them find themselves in the natural world. And so this is truly important work. If we truly want to create long-term The conservationists, environmentalists of the future are alive today. They're about 3 to 4 years old. And unless we make that relevant to them and something that they feel that they can connect with, we're not doing the kind of job that we could be doing. So I'm glad that the OCRF has considered this as an important piece of our benefiting to the world.
Thank you, Mauricio. I wanted to point that out, Mark, because Mark Labhart, as you were wondering why and how the organization became so successful, I thought it was important to point out Mauricio was on the board. He's a big part of that. Well, thank you, both of you, for coming. That was a great presentation, really well done. I'm proud to see the OCRF logo on your front page of that, and that makes me very proud. So, and I think all of us feel the same. So thank you very much for that presentation.
Well, thank you. And we really appreciate the opportunity to share. And we hope that you guys keep supporting this kind of good work that gets families out there, because it really does make a difference.
Thank you very much. Charlotte, now weren't we going to change it up a little bit?
We are, yes. So in light of the fact that Mauricio is at an airport and we want to make sure we keep quorum, Carl and I, as the chair, kind of discussed that we're going to shift up the agenda. We're actually going to move up the special project request. So agenda item 7 is going to now be moved up before we do our project reporting updates and our funding updates. So as I pull up the slides for that, Carl, I may ask if you can start teeing up this conversation. And then
Sure.
I can kind of pull up at least kind of a project map and a couple photos as you talk, if that works.
Okay, so I think all of y'all recall that one of the mandates we had from the Oregon legislature was to raise $1 million in private funds. So we set up a really nice mechanism. We had a special projects committee to help facilitate large-scale donations for big projects so that we could really help and make an impact across Oregon, and also raise that $1 million that we needed. Then, thanks to the great work of people like James, that went away. They took away that requirement for a match. But if you recall, we felt like that program was so successful that we should continue it, because that would allow us to facilitate large donations with the leverage that we had in the match. And we allocated or decided that we would try to hit that $1 million in private funds, either unrestricted or restricted. So that meant that for projects that we've accepted, we could, in fact, accept donations for those projects. And we've done that, as you know, that we've had several in the past, starting with the $60,000 for the wildlife crossing at Gilchrist that we got from Pew Charitable Trust. That set the stage. We've had some really large donations funding a lot of DEI type work with Forest Park Conservancy. And one of the projects that we approved in our last round was an incredible project, quite near and dear to my heart, in Southeast Oregon, the Trout Creek acquisition put together by the Oregon Desert Lands Conservancy in conjunction with several partners, including the Nature Conservancy. And a very, very exciting project that we approved. Well, when I informed them of this, Brent Fenty was well aware of our match program and was very interested in participating. Well, very quickly, we had the opportunity to match quite a bit of money to the tune of up to $400,000 to $500,000. With that, when that became apparent, Charlotte, being the thorough person that she is, wanted to make sure we did this in a very methodical and well thought out way. she felt that we really needed to review this through the Special Projects Committee. Again, technically, it isn't 100% necessary, but she felt because of the amount of money that was warranted that we would go through this process with the Special Projects Committee and then bring it to the full board for approval. So with that, Charlotte, is that enough teeing up to get to your presentation?
Yeah, I think it is. And I might just add on a couple things. So Carl can better kind of explain a little bit about the land, but I do want to talk a little bit about the process that Carl just talked about so that everyone on the board kind of can think about what procedures we followed and how this fits into some of our larger OCRF missions and goals. So this, as Carl mentioned, is a very large chunk of land, not only a physical kind of piece of land that you can see on this map in the orange, but also large swaths of grazing. So it's important to make sure that for this project that we do understand is that the special project put forth in front of the OCRF right now is to help the Trout Creek Ranch Project or the Oregon Desert Land Trust pay down an existing loan on this land. This land was already acquired in July 2021. So they've owned this land for over a year. So our request is actually to pay down the existing loan on there. It is a nuanced difference, but one I do want to make sure that we talk about. And really the benefit of doing this is that, as you can see in the materials that I provided you when we sent out our meeting materials, the benefit is by assisting with Trout Creek Ranch to pay down this loan, it actually helps free them up as an organization and help free up their funding structure to continue the restoration on this land faster. So by helping to pay down the loan, they're able to do their restoration faster and really springboard the goals that we would like as OCRF if this project moves forward, and also the goals of the agency, which is restoration of this piece of land, and really to help provide that ability for them to do it faster. So this is just some specific text that really would be the consideration of this project. I also do want to mention, as Carl said earlier, is that the Oregon Desert Land Trust did obtain a $50,000 grant from the OCRF in our last competitive funding round. This $50,000 grant was specifically for paying for personnel to help manage this land and also to pay for supplies and contracts to help with the restoration. So with that, I will pause and see, Carl, if you have anything else you would want to mention before we kind of open it up for a discussion.
I think all of y'all maybe recall just the enormity of what this project means. They acquired quite a bit of private land, really key land. Again, we're talking about riparian. The private land is all riparian, and riparian areas are the jewels of that whole region. They drive the whole system. They now have acquired quite a bit of private riparian areas, but in addition, they will get the grazing leases that go with that. So not only will they be able to carry out incredible riparian restoration, but also greatly impact how the rest of the land is managed through their grazing leases. If I'm remembering this correctly, it's an area the size of Massachusetts that is impacted by this acquisition in terms of what their impact is going to be on the land. So it's really quite significant. And I'd also like to reiterate, when I talked with Brent about this funding, he says if this goes through, it will move up their conservation by 3 years. Because it obviates interest payments, it moves them closer to the goal. And he says, man, we're going to be able to start our conservation activities 3 years earlier than anticipated if this is approved. So I think those are the key points that I have.
And actually, if I may, just one other thing. As we were going through this process, I have gone through multiple conversations with the Oregon Desert Land Trust. This land will have various levels of public access, as you saw through the recreation plan document that I provided. It will also, in addition, have direct benefits for wildfire mitigation in that area. They do have a wildfire plan, and they are targeting some of their restoration, and particularly the grazing plans, towards making sure that they are maintaining the land in a healthy way, that if for some reason a wildfire happened in that area, they can help kind of respond and kind of reduce fuel loads on that land. So those were two additional things I do want to mention, specifically because those do help touch on some of the OCRF needs and missions. And also the department is supportive of this. There is obviously quite a bit of conservation benefit from this, helping this organization do their conservation restoration faster. And it does overlap with many different key species and habitats that the department is interested in. So with that, Carl, I may pass the conversation to you to help coordinate any sort of discussion or questions from the board.
Sure. With that, so that's kind of the background. Does anyone have questions? Jane?
It's actually not a question. I just wanted to say that one of the amazing things about this land is that it is has by far the biggest population of sage grouse that have their leks there. And so that's a really key species that was in danger of being listed. So that's really another important reason.
Mark Labhart?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. Charlotte, is anybody from the public going to testify on this or weigh in on this?
I've had no one from the public testify on this but because of the fact that we had this kind of bump in our agenda, before you make any sort of action as an advisory committee, I will actually ask if there's anyone on the call that would like to comment on this.
Okay, might be a good idea since we moved it up in the agenda. So I don't know if Brent's on, or maybe somebody can answer this question. And I should have brought this up the last time when we talked about this, but when I was reading over the project narrative, and my question has to do with fishing and hunting. So that's the background on it. So in the narrative, it says that the trust will facilitate hunting and recreation areas and plans to develop additional bird watching opportunities and complement those available on nearby National Wildlife Refuge. And then on another page, it says TNC via formal collaboration agreement with the land trust is involved. We intend to partner with the Oregon Natural Desert Association, Oregon Hunters Association, and other user groups to improve habitat conditions through volunteer projects such as removal of obsolete fencing. And then on another page, it talks about conservation with the recreation element. And then on the last page of it says project furthers the framework goals of improving engagement of public wildlife watching, hunting, fishing opportunities. So I did reach out to Charlotte early on. And, when we first started the OCRF, we had a check off to raise those private funds, as Carl talked about. And there was a significant amount of folks that were both hunters and fishers that checked the little box when they purchased their hunting and fishing licenses that contributed to the OCRF. And when TNC acquired Zumwalt Prairie, it was a huge conservation effort to manage that property, but they also included hunting as a part of that management strategy. So my question is fairly simple. It looks like this does allow for public hunting and public fishing where applicable in coordination with state and federal laws and rules and regulations. So is my assumption correct that it's not going to restrict hunting and fishing on this property as,
Mark,
a potential use on it?
I think I can, I've talked specifically to Brent about that very thing. And I mean, what I will say is, they are formulating their final, they do not have a final plan. They've worked to purchase it. They're assessing it. I can't tell you that they've written out exactly what the hunting and fishing access will be, but I know that is their intention. There's one particular, the reason I know this well is ODF&W, I think one of the greatest programs that ODF&W has is a traditional bow hunt in the trout creeks. It's just awesome.
Yep.
There are no compounds. It's all traditional, really great. Bunch of people go there. One of the issues is there's a whole bunch of public ground that you can't access at all because you have to cross private ground. I asked Brent specifically about that. He goes, "Oh yeah, we're very likely." Again, it's not cut and set in stone. But he says, "Yeah, that's something we're looking at. We would allow access to that huge mahogany ridge, which is the name of it, across the private ground, which they just acquired." So while I can't say that they have it written down that exactly what they're going to do, that's the intention, as pretty much what you read.
Thank you. That addresses it.
Any other questions or comments? Well,
Carl,
Charlotte,
before we move on, I may actually, and I know this is a little bit out of order, I would ask if there's any members of the public that are currently on. Since I'm going to stop sharing my screen for this moment, just to make sure I can see you. If there's anyone from the public that would like to comment or make any sort of statements along these lines, please feel free to raise your hand or to unmute, your preference.
Ken
I see.
McCall.
Yep, please go ahead.
Let me find my button here. There I am. I just wanted to say I appreciate the conversation that was just had about the traditions of hunting and fishing within the trout creeks. That is extremely important for us in Oregon Hunters Association. Tyler Dungannon, our conservation staff person, signed on here a little bit ago, and I'm sure he would second this, but a big thank you to Mark for that conversation, and also thanks Carl for kind of following up on that. But it is our expectation that that we'll continue to have opportunities to hunt there, and also that Mahogany Ridge that's an incredible piece of real estate, Carl, as you said, and the opportunity for some traditional archers to hunt in that piece of real estate is something that we would really like to see continued also. So that's all I had. Thanks.
Thank you, Ken. I thought one last thing, kind of a little bit of background on this. We met with this special projects committee last week, and my expectation going into this was that, you know, we weren't going to approve the whole amount, that we were going to match a smaller number. And I would have been happy with that. I would have preferred to match the whole amount, but I really didn't expect that. I didn't make a comment one way or the other, but the participants, particularly Moret and Mauricio, they said, let's go big. Let's have an impact. They wanted to go the whole way. They saw the value of this. They saw the amount of money that we have matched for other more DEI type projects. And they've just, without me having to persuade them in any way, elected to fund the entire amount that we have before us. So I just wanted to explain how that number came up. I was ready to entertain a smaller number, but that's not what the Special Projects Committee recommended. So are we ready to take a vote, Charlotte?
It sounds like you may be. Let me pull up my screen. Hopefully it will work. And it is the discretion of the board as a whole to decide if you want, and I just want to give you a breakdown of, once again, what we are talking about. So the request, as Carl did just mention, would be a total grant for $750,000. That would be $590,000 of private restricted donation, that would then be matched by the $160,000 from the $100,000 from the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund. Unfortunately, obviously, we did our presentations a little bit backwards, so it doesn't give you all of the context of what our funds in and out have been and how this really matches up. But I would like to just make this statement that with this, if this grant amount is approved as a special project as a whole, it really does push us to that $1 million that Carl mentioned that we wanted as our, actually pushes us over slightly to that $1 million that we really were aiming to continue to fundraise, so that if we had that match, we would want to continue that. And also this project is obviously very conservation focused, obviously, as we just discussed, with some recreation access to said land. Many of our other special projects, as we'll see later on today, have been very much recreation or community based. So that this really does balance your portfolio of special projects as you think about conservation, recreation, kind of the nature and the human aspects of things. So with that, I do have a draft motion. The committee has every right to adjust, amend, or add any sort of clarification additions to this.
Charlotte, I do have, can you go back to the previous slide?
Yep.
So maybe I'm being simplistic. The way I looked at this, it was 590,000 of private restricted funds, and 30% of that is 177,000. Did I not calculate that? 590 times 0.3 is 177.
All right, that is my math. We can fix that. I'm gonna remove this.
I mean, that my computer did that. Someone might check that and make sure I did that right.
And just 1 second, I'm gonna figure out what is going on in my screen. Are you seeing my screen right now?
No.
Perfect. 177.
Or why she's calculating. I just took the 750, Carl, and 160 is a 21% donation for the total amount of OCRF. That's another way to look at it.
But our program is 30% of the.
I thought it was 550,000, which was 400 from TNC and 150 from the land trust, which was 550. But I'm going on memory, not what's in.
All right, hang on just 1 second, everybody. We are going to make sure we fix this, if this is how we need to.
I recall that the total ended up being 615 when I did the math. Or 750. Well, never mind. I'll let you do it. I'm not great with numbers. But I think Mark might be right. It was 400 from TNC and then 150 from Greenfield and Heartline.
So let me, just give me 1 second. So TNC is asking to provide $400,000. Greenfield Foundation is asking for two separate $75,000 donations. So that would be a donation of $550 with your.
And 30% is 165. And the total then is 715, which is the number I remember.
Give me 1 second. I am adjusting our motion as we are going through this. Are you able to see my screen right now?
Yep, the magic of editing.
Yep. All right. So to be clear, what we are putting forward right now is 400,000. And I did just pull up this communication with the applicant to make sure this is accurate now. 400,000 from TNC, 75 from the Greenfield Foundation, additional 75 from the Greenfield Foundation. That would be a private restricted donation of 550 with our 30% match, which calculate to 165. You are requesting or putting forward a proposal to give them a total of 715. And if that is how you choose to move forward, your motion is on the screen for consideration as it is. So these numbers are adjusted, obviously, within the meeting. They will be finalized and posted so that they would be referenced as your reference material.
Great. Thank you for correcting that, Charlotte. So we have a motion.
I'm happy to go.
Great.
I move that the committee approves the expenditure of up to $715,000 on the Trout Creek Ranch Special Project for the Oregon Desert Land Trust, as described in the September 12th, 2022 meeting materials.
So we have a motion, and do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Mark Stern seconds. Wonderful. All in favor of that motion?
Can you verbally go through ayes just so that it's on the visual record this time due to the nature
Okay,
of this?
all in favor, say aye.
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 Are there any opposed?
Sounds unanimous. Oh, man, this makes me so happy.
Excellent. And I would say as staff, I obviously did hear comments from the board and also from members of the public. There's obviously a continued interest in, as this applicant continues to develop their land management plan, we can even invite them to come and give us updates on that, how and when that's appropriate, and to continue that communication of the board's interest in how and when it is appropriate having public access and what that public access would continue to be, if that is in line with what the chair's kind of thoughts are.
Great.
Okay. And just for the record, I do want to make sure that the board is aware, in addition to the public, this motion and specifically the special project does not need to actually go to the ODFW Commission. The reason for that is that this project as a whole has already received ODFW Commission approval for expenditure. And that was because of the way the motion was provided to them at their last meeting, that it says contingent upon additional private donations. So obviously this motion and material packets will be provided to the commission when I present to them next, just so that they are aware of kind of the ongoing work of OCRF, but this was your final kind of step to approve this funds.
All right, great. I got one last aside. It's appropriate that Mauricio made that motion when we had our special projects meeting. Mauricio led it off with an incredibly logical and thoughtful reason why we should not fund the whole thing. And then he followed it up with an incredibly logical and thoughtful reason why we should. And that prevailed. So thank you, Mauricio.
You can count on my paradoxes anytime, Carl.
Oh, man, it just makes me proud to be part of this group. It really does. So thank you all for that. All right. Well, Charlotte, I think we are a little behind.
We are a little behind, but not terribly. So what I would ask is that since we are shuffling everything quite a bit, I would like to maybe ask, we were scheduled a meeting break in 10 minutes. Would you like to have your meeting break now, or would you like me to go through the first section of our project reporting updates?
I think if we're gonna have a break, we should have it now.
Okay.
And I think 5 minutes is fine. I think we'll still be okay.
I actually want to, before we go to break, I do want to notice, I did have a Fifi Wagner just signed on. I am not sure, you are actually from TNC. May I ask if you would like to provide any comment here, or if you were just here to listen?
Thanks so much. No comments today, but I appreciate all that you all are doing, and I'm really excited about this news.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you, Phoebe, for joining. If there is no other comments from the board, I would like to ask that if we can try to take a 5-minute break, come back just a couple minutes after. So we will do 2:32 roughly. If we can try to do that, that'd be great.
Thanks. Sounds good. All right, let's take a break. We'll be back.
And Carl, as we are on break, I'm going to do some reshuffling of our meeting agenda. I believe what I'm going to most likely do is I'm going to steal 10 minutes from our monitoring and evaluation conversation and try to keep that to about 25 minutes. I still think that will be appropriate for where we're at right now.
Great. That sounds good, Charlotte. I'm good with it.
Perfect. Great. So I see one more video back. Hopefully we get people in just a few more minutes. So if I may, for those of you that are slowly trickling back, can you please either type in the chat and or turn on your video so that I know that you are back. And we will start once we reach quorum, or with the chair's permission, your preference, Carl.
I think we can get rolling.
Excellent. So we are going to condense just a little bit on our agenda. For those that are back, we will be condensing down the OCRF monitoring and evaluation discussion, which I think is appropriate and timely place regardless to condense because we're not quite at a full discussion point there. But I will be starting with back up at what was posted as agenda item 4, which is the OCRF project and reporting updates. We will pause for public comment in case there is any additional, but we have already had a little bit, to then go into the OCRF funding, at which point we should be right back on track for our agenda for the rest of the day. So with that, I'm going to hopefully share my screen. Okay. Carl, are you able to see my screen?
I am.
Excellent. So
Charlotte, just so you know, Mauricio, I guess he texted everyone, Mauricio is boarding his flight. And he may or may not be able to do in-flight Wi-Fi.
okay, that should still be okay. So we will have, okay, I will still have quorum as long as everybody else pops back on. Because we can only lose one of you. Perfect. So with that, let's get started. If you are okay with that, Carl?
Yep.
Perfect. So the next part of this agenda is I'm just going to give a brief overview of the OCRF project reporting updates, kind of where are we at with projects, how do we maybe move forward with some more efficiency. There is a proposed section that we can do a motion to adjust your expenditure framework. I'll leave it to the discretion of the chair or not if you want to do that, or we can always consider the motion this time and make it next time, although you will have enough to make quorum, and then go from there. So today's section of the presentation is really a more summarized version of what the OCRF board has received in an Excel spreadsheet earlier this week. This is just a high-level version of that. So where are we at? So at the July 11th meeting, we actually kind of went through this, and actually that's July 13th, so apologies for that typo. We went through kind of where are we at with our projects, and really what we did is we looked at them by round, which is the time at which you awarded them, and then also kind of what are our total awards, are they active, closed, or inactive? And just to be clear, that active grants were ones that were still within their contract period, have signed contracts and are still, they're working on them or getting paid. Closed grants were obviously ones in which we have paid out and completed all associated paperwork, including final reports. Inactive was kind of a gray area, as its name implies, where it's either paperwork that is out of date, unsigned, or for some other reason are not necessarily up to date on what we need them to be doing. So at this July 13th meeting, there was 5 of those in that category. So fast forward to today, and this is reflected within the Excel sheets that the board has. We are still obviously at 90 grants, but it is important that we've moved several of those projects from the inactive into the closed category, and several of the active grants once again into the closed category. So I'm excited to say that we are closing out grants, and to close a grant that is not only obviously meeting the contracting requirements, we have final grant reports, which have been put into a folder for the OCRF advisory members to review, and also have completed and filled out all accounting paperwork to legally close those grants out fiscally. We have 10 more grants that are scheduled to complete by January 1st, 2023. And once those kind of completed contract dates are triggered, then I'll start closing those grants out as well. So with that, I'm going to just go through one more slide and then pause. I do want to kind of highlight for the OCRF board, and this is a little confusing, so I apologize. I can't really think of a better way of thinking about this. But I want you to consider moving forward, how are our grant cycles going to be kind of compounding onto each other? And the purpose of this is to think about what is the growth rate of the OCRF if we continue granting as we were, but then considering the rate at which we close grants. And it's important to kind of think about is that with the way that our grants and contracting had been occurring previous to kind of the new procedures that I've put into place, kind of just to think about timing and scale, we have been closing out grants much, much slower than we have been gaining grants. So as you can see here, by January 2023, we are expected to have about 68 active grants. That is assuming that in this current granting cycle, you kind of award roughly 20 new grants, and we had 48 past grants. So at each one of these different time periods, you're going to see this is an assumption that you only add 20 new grants each time that you kind of go through your granting cycle. So this would be the August, October 2022, where you are right now. The next one you're going to see is the January 2023, March 2023 RFP cycle, because we do 2 competitive RFP cycles each time. So based on kind of our rate of growth in the period of which you're going to be closing grants out, it's expected the OCRF is going to continue to grow until January 2025, where at any given point, I'm going to have roughly 85 grants that are active managing. So that is a pretty large portfolio for a single staff member. Good news is I have some ideas of maybe how to streamline that, but I maybe will pause there and see if there's any questions about like, where are we? Does this feel like a good, comfortable level? And also acknowledging you've always granted more than 20 at this point in some of these. So if that is where you guys might want to do, and this is not a motion by any stretch of the imagination, this is just kind of a let people think about the growth rate for the OCRF and where we might be falling.
Just a quick nuts and bolts question, Charlotte. So we've traditionally sort of done like a 2-year award, right? Up to 2 years. I mean, they sort of get to set what they are, but traditionally we'd like to sort of live within that.
If that was, sorry, I'm not sure if you cut out, but actually we've let the people choose their own grant period. And that's something I'm going to be getting into. Verbally, they've been suggested 2 years is really where we'd like them to be. Very, very few grants to date had stayed within the 2 years. We have grants from your first round that are still asking for extensions, and they're on to their 3rd extension without having an additional funds added to their project.
Okay. Can you hear me or is it broken up?
We can hear you now.
Hear you fine.
Okay. I apologize. Yeah, I guess I was going to ask the question, which we'll probably talk about later, like you said, but if the grant periods were sort of like from the award date, 2 years moving forward, or if there was like a certain biennium. So I'll keep listening in to see where we're at, but I think it's a smart move to go to a definite ending.
The only downside I see to that, I mean, it certainly makes sense to keep the applicants accountable and move them forward. However, I think we're all aware that some of our not preferred, but the types of groups that we're trying to encourage aren't necessarily going to be able to keep those timetables like we would like. And so I think while we want to make this streamlined and we don't want to have Charlotte have hundreds of active grants, there are, given some of the entities that we have cultivated to apply to us, we may have to have some flexibility there.
And I think that is exactly the direction that I'm hoping to bring us, is that flexibility, but with structure. And we can always maybe consider some of the things I put forward and then always readdress them later after you have some time to think about them.
Right.
Are there any other kind of thoughts about either the Excel sheet that I provided to the board themselves or kind of the status of our grants? This is your current status with the 58 active grants, total of 90, or any other, the specific kind of growth estimates. I know this is very messy slide, so apologies if it doesn't seem to make sense to your brain.
Charlie, go back to that slide again, if you don't mind. This is just a bit of an aside, but look at the closed grant category. We got 31 closed grants. That's great. What it brings up though is now we've got 31 completed projects. We kind of talked about monitoring and we have a discussion about that coming up. But that's the number, that 31. We got to start looking back at these. And so that's just kind of segueing up to our next discussion.
Great. So with that, I'm going to move forward, and obviously, as always, please feel free to interrupt. So these are just, and once again, these are not necessarily things for to do a motion or set in stone, but these are maybe some recommendations that it would be nice for the board to think about. And just kind of starting with the concept of if we stay on kind of the growth rate and closeout rate that we have, which I am expected what we mostly will, by January 2025, we're expected to have about 85 active grants. That is kind of looking at staying within the window of about 20 grants awarded per cycle. So roughly for the last cycle, you got about 60 grants. You awarded, obviously over 20, you're awarded, I believe, 27, including some of the special projects that were funded supplementary. So keeping around the 20 mark is roughly about, if we don't increase our application rate, about a 1/3 success rate. That's pretty good, even for small grants. So if you stay at about that point, resources is just something to bring up, is that obviously this grant program, unlike some of the larger ones, are still on a kind of the paper and pen style, where your grant applications are put through Google Forms. We are going to address that hopefully moving forward. And then also staff levels. We have some more private forest accord and additional staff members coming on board kind of through that we'll be able to leverage, but kind of just a consideration there. So you might want to kind of think about ways that we can help streamline this. And this is where we can think about some of those updates to the expenditure framework that I proposed. We can obviously red pen these. These are just starting places for your consideration, or you can also table these for another time. So I will pause and see if Carl, would you like me to move on to the next section, or if anyone has any other questions?
Let's see if anyone has any comments on this one. Because this is this is Mark Glabhart.
Well, I have a question on staffing, but are we going to discuss that a little bit later, or is this the time?
We can discuss it now with the chair's permission. I can answer as many questions as I can, but I do see Sarah would be on, so she might be able to pop in and help.
Go right in.
Okay, so I don't know if the advisory committee knows this or not, but Charlotte's in what they call a limited duration position. It goes away at the end of this biennium. And so we've got a what they call a program option package. I think it's number 112. That moves her from a limited duration to a permanent position. And Sarah may want to weigh in on this. I see she's on, but if I've got this wrong or not. But so it's going to be really important that members and stakeholders that are watching this support that POP package, because if that position goes away unless we can get that POP approved for a full-time position. And it's actually, you know, I'm even concerned about that from the standpoint of the workload is just getting astronomical here for staff. And so, but we got to at least get Pop 112 approved to get this to a permanent position. And we're going to need some support from those stakeholders out there that think OCRF is a good program and to continue it. So we need to have the staffing to do that. So Sarah, did I capture that, or did you want to modify it any?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And, you know, I think it's a very strong package that we've put forward to continue the funding. As you'll recall, part of that package is to make the position permanent, and the other part is the $3 million that we requested to add to the OCRF fund. So yeah, I'll double check the number, but I think you're probably right, Commissioner Labhart, on that it's 112. But yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to that. I think, you know, if that were to not go through, I think you know, I think we'll be doing some contingency planning. We won't just wait and see what legislature is going to do. But yeah, that is our first and best option, is that policy option package.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll chime in just for reference. At our office, we usually run anywhere from 70 to 80 grants each year, and our admin person is definitely busting at the seams. And we've just recently hired an assistant for her. So I feel you.
Well, if I may, this might be a good time just to talk a little bit about, there will be a little bit more kind of infrastructure provided to the OCRF, kind of, as I said, leveraging the opportunity for the private forest accord to kind of come into the OCRF family, but obviously with separate accounts. I will be, hopefully, as part of the OCRF main group, we will be collaborating with the private forest accord new staff coordinator. That does give a leverage point. There will be an admin associated with private forest accord. That will be a little bit of leverage point. And we're kind of exploring different options to help our contracting team also. But they are internally doing a really great job of writing out protocols. We're assisting on the staff level from a program standpoint. And there's a lot of internal kind of coordination of how do we maximize who we have and how do we leverage some places where we might be getting additional resources. So definitely not a doom and gloom here, but I do want to mention that we are going to need to be very strategic with how we think about growing the program so that it stays the best thing that it is right now, and that you don't try to do too much and lose the ability to do what you do best, which is granting awesome projects to small groups. And these small groups do need a lot of assistance because they're new, and that is our stakeholder purpose. If I may, Commissioner Lockhart, if you had a question.
If I could just add one more thing, you know, when you do a really good job at something, people say, well, they do a really good job, let's give them some more. You remember that commercial on TV? Give it to Mikey, he'll eat anything, you know? So it's kind of like that with OCRF. You've done such a great job that the legislature and legislators see that and want to give more funding. The same thing's happening in OWEB too. They're getting, you know, you do a great job, let's give you some more funding. And so along with that comes a workload and staffing, and OCRF has been so successful. I mean, we've actually, Carl can tell you this, I mean, we've exploded in terms of credibility and funding and, you know, things that are going to happen. It's a great problem to have, but just need to be aware that it takes some workload behind the scenes to make it all happen. So that's my comment. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. I want to point something out with that first line, the first bullet point that Charlotte put up there. That's just something for us to keep in mind. What we've done is we sent a numeric amount. We said, okay, we're going to give $1 million. And then we just increased the number to, because a lot of projects weren't necessarily for 50 grand. And I was really happy when I'd see an inexpensive project. That meant we could do more projects. But each project, doesn't matter whether it's $10,000 or $50,000, it's about the same amount of work for Charlotte. So what we may have to adjust our thinking and say, okay, we're not going to spend more than $1 million. But if we'll pick that 20 grant number as our number, and even if it adds up to 900,000, we're not going to pick 4 more, at least in this interim period till we get our feet underneath us. And I think that's appropriate. I mean, we've sort of been going pedal to the metal from the get-go, and it's time maybe to pull back a little bit. And so this is a nice way to do it, Charlotte. I like that idea of picking a number of grants. We can still say we won't spend, if we get 20 grants at $50,000, that would be $1 million. But we may not get to that billion, and doesn't mean we have to go dig for other grants to fill it. So I think this is a nice way to do it.
And this is just a starting place. You will obviously have multiple opportunities to kind of continue to think about this, and some time actually in your November meeting to think about this as well. So this is just one of the many ideas. So with that, I do want to be mindful of time. I'm going to and Carl, I will ask you maybe to make a call here. I'm going to go through some of my ideas for the expenditure framework. Updates, these expenditure updates obviously will not be applied to the current RFP because that will be kind of retroactively putting rules on the applicants. But it will be your choice if you want to make the motion to adopt them now, or we can push that to the October 3rd. Strategically, it makes no difference from the staff perspective. There were just things that came to my mind as I was grappling with how do we organize moving forward.
We can't really, without a quorum, can we adopt anything?
You cannot adopt without a quorum, but I believe you have one. So you have, let me just double check, Jane got back on. And Shristi, am I still seeing you?
Yeah, I'm here, Charlotte.
Yep, you still just by the skin of your teeth have a quorum.
Okay, great.
So I'm going to go through these texts. Obviously, you're welcome to wordsmith them. You're also welcome to kind of think about this. So the way that I was kind of moving forward with this is that I want to try to give us some softer boundaries on some of our contracting so that as a staff perspective, it allows us to kind of structure what applicants are expecting, but also provide us the ability to, in some situations, and not all of them, say no sometimes. And we haven't had that structure to do so. So basically 3 bullets that I'm proposing for timelines. Really, we need to have projects request a 2-year work period. And one thing to consider is that that work period is basically the project when they want to do their project. And unless the applicant gets prior written approval from the OCRF coordinator prior to submitting the project. So basically, if there's a project that's 3 years, before they submit it, they need to kind of contact me or the chair prior and make sure that I'm aware that that project is still going to be allowed to move forward for consideration, even though it has that 3-year period. Projects can receive 1 contract amendment for an extension of the work period for up to 1 year. That really gives us that flexibility for projects that something happens in a season. That 1 year extension is important because we've had projects, as I've mentioned before, get 3 extensions for 3 years. That is really not feasible for a project. It is curious for kind of managing some of that unless it's really odd circumstances, and also for a contracting standpoint, it's additional workload. Every amendment reinitiates the contract processing. So it is quite a bit of internal steps. And one thing I really want to say is applicants can't postpone the acceptance of the grant. They would need to accept the grant, then use their extension. They can't just say, I don't want to see a contract for another 1.5 years. And this is something that we have actually had occur within the projects. Someone has received a project, had it awarded, and then said, actually, we were not ready. Just send us a contract in 1 year and a bit, and then we'll sign it then. That is an unusual process for a grant group, and I've never seen it elsewhere. Normally, you would have to accept the grant, explain what the issue is, and then ask for an extension. I will pause there and see if there's any questions about timelines.
So Charlotte, this would, if we adopted this, this would not be for this grant cycle. It would be for the future.
My recommendation is that it would be for the future. So the current grant cycle would use the current expenditure framework. After this grant cycle, this additional language would be placed into your expenditure framework. Remember, your expenditure framework is not binding. It's not a contract or an MOU. What it is guidelines at which we want applicants to follow. And that would be updated for your January 2023 RFP that would come out. So not this one, but the following.
And Charlotte, the projections that you showed earlier up to like 2025, having that many active grants at that point, is that based on this project timeline or the current one?
It is a little bit of both. So it would be, the first two projections are based on the current, but following the January 2023, any grants awarded after that, we're assuming this.
Gotcha.
And
Charlotte,
go ahead.
in your mind, where it says a period of 2 years or less, when does the 2 years start? I mean, because is it when they're notified, or can they just?
So I think I heard everything that you said, Mark. I left that language a little bit vague. My way that I would prefer to administer it would be from the 2 years from the date of contract signature. And when I write up a contract, I always ask the applicant, do you guys usually start in spring? Do you start in summer? So if you have a contract that would be signed in June of 2022, traditionally that would go until June of 2026. If you need to say, you know, I would need to go a couple months after that, what we can do is we can have that little bit of a wiggle room there. It would not be the time of notification because it takes me roughly 2 months at this time to get a contract out the door. So that would be obviously eating into the applicant's time period.
So it's basically from the time the contract is signed, and then that might be give or take a month or two.
Yes, and we can, and remember, you don't need to approve this language. This is kind of a first gut check. We can pass the motion and think about if there's a way we want to adjust this language to be more effective. Acknowledging the fact, if I gave someone a contract in June and go June, 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 but really their work period is April, they kind of miss another work period, hypothetically, depending on how you see when they want to work. So there is flexibility in this, but I would like us to move towards a little bit more of a structure, asking them to work in 2 years.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. I guess I was just trying to make the point, and you picked up on it. Depending on when the field season is or the field work, you just wouldn't want to get caught. You know, if you signed it in the fall, well, to your example, I guess if you signed it in June and the work was in April, you might lose a field season, but it sounds like you're sensitive to it. So.
And this is vague purposely for that purpose. Acknowledging that we can kind of work with the contract, work with the thing, but we've had applicants expect 5 years and then we need to work with them. And this gives them the upfront expectation, we want you in 2 years. Or come to us and discuss why 5 years is where you want to be. And this is your expenditure framework. None of this is binding. What this is guidance in which we ask applicants to review. So let me go to the next section, and payments. So once again, this is a little bit dense, but I will kind of explain some of this. So reimbursement payments, basically what this says is that I will only accept reimbursement payment paperwork for 90 days after the expiration of a contract. So therefore, if your contract expires in January of 2022, I do not have an obligation to continue to basically pester an applicant for materials in September of 2022. They would basically, I would send reminders and that they really need to get their paperwork in within 3 months of the expiration of their contract. Obviously, there would be communications, documented communications, and making sure that if they need the kind of that extension, they could get one. But I am currently in a situation that we have contracts that are over 9 months expired that I'm still trying to track down an applicant to ask for their receipts. So that's kind of where that is. OCRF also has a prepayment contract where we can, in cases where applicants don't have funding to start a project without having that upfront payment, so they need that seed money in hand. This allows us to make sure the applicant can request it, and also that we are aware they're going to need it. There is actually a question within the OCRF application right now that says, do you think you're going to need a prepayment? It does not affect any of your scoring or anything like that. It just helps me from a contracting standpoint make sure that I know they're going to need that. And also it is double the work if an applicant comes to us after the fact that they've signed a contract and turn around and say, we actually need a prepayment. We can always switch it, but this helps them know that they need to ask up front if we can help. Many of them know up front that they need it. And also funds received by a prepayment really need to be expended within 120 days of acceptance of the prepayment. And this is something that's kind of been recommended by our contracting team, because if you get a prepayment in $50,000 and it sits in your account for 2 years, there's a potential you earn interest on it. And that is actually a really gray area that we don't want applicants to get into contracting wise. So we would really ask them that if you get your prepayment, you need to spend your prepayment. Otherwise, give it back to us and we can issue it again at a different time. But basically, if you need your prepayment, be prepared. Or ask for as much of a prepayment as you need for funds at hand. We can offer multiple prepayments or multiple reimbursements as well. So I'm going to pause here and see if this makes any sort of sense. And this is in line with OWEB and other granting bodies. So this language is very analogous to what they have, obviously.
Shart, that was my question was, I mean, I'm assuming that this is consistent with what R&E does and the other programs, even within ODF and W as well as OWEB. So
this is consistent, but 1,000 times more lenient, honestly. This is much more of a grace period than many organizations offer.
I think Kelly just agreed with you on that.
And it's meant to be. Our applicants, we are fostering applicants that can't go to other groups sometimes. This is why we need to make sure that we are acknowledging their needs, but also providing upfront structure to where we can. And once again, in expenditure framework, none of this is binding, but it is guidance. Last ones are kind of a little bureaucratic, but I do want to make sure that we do cover these. The first one is basically, if your project's awarded, you really need to be able to sign the contract more or less that we put in front of you. Contracts will not be negotiated on a case-by-case basis unless you contact the program coordinator in advance. This is something that is kind of recommended from a staffing standpoint, from the fact that moving forward, we're going to have an example contract of, basically on our website, we're going to post example contracts. Basically, this is what you expect. Is there any wording that kind of doesn't work for your organization? We are currently spending dozens of hours negotiating contracts on a one-by-one basis with other governments and public universities. And I would say, unfortunately, they tend to be our problem children with contracting. Because public entities often need case-by-case specific contracting. It is extremely difficult to do that. So we're going to need applicants to see examples of contracts and to really think before they apply and chat with me of what specific regulations they need and they don't need. That does not negate anyone from applying or hamper their ability. It's not a barrier, but it does open a communication pathway early so that we can start working with them if we need to. We have had applicants halfway through a contract negotiation suddenly ask us to remove all OARs. That is extremely difficult and involves us writing a brand new contract for them. So from a staffing standpoint, we need to know this in advance. Insurance is another new issue. I would say, for better or for worse, we have gotten new guidance from the Oregon Department of Administration that we need to make all applicants now carry insurance. This is standard practice on OWEB applications and all other state applications. We are obviously helping applicants to the best of our ability to gain this insurance. There is also the ability for them to budget it in. So we are willing to pay for this insurance. We also have a question that says, if this insurance is above and beyond what your budget is, let us know. There might be the ability to also help supplement that. So that is something just to make sure. And also, if a contract is offered to an applicant, they really need 60 days to sign or to have correspondence with us. If we send them an application or a contract to sign and we have crickets for 60 days, that is usually the period of time for almost all granting groups that it kind of, the contract's pulled back. They can't, we have an applicant right now that has sat on a contract for 8 months, then contacted us back and said, oh, we want to actually sign this. That is very difficult from a staffing level and honestly a procedural level to allow. This is once again in line with other granting programs. So I'll pause there and see if anyone has any questions about this.
No, I just wanted to make note that it is really considerate and thoughtful of OCRF to let you include the insurance costs in that. That's not something that always happens either, but it is definitely something that provides accessibility to contractors who aren't able to carry that amount of insurance, but want to be able to do some of the work. So that's great.
Charlotte, a slight aside, do you have any guidelines in terms of how often a grant recipient can submit an invoice to you? Can they submit them quarterly if they want to, or is it sort of just one shot at the end, or how does that play out for you?
They can submit them weekly for as much as I care, because some of these groups do need that. So we have no guidelines, and I actually would be for not necessarily providing guidelines on that. I think that we should provide them their money when they need it. My preference is that if we need to really be providing funds on such a regular basis, I would prefer to have a prepayment set up where I can give them larger chunks of money and process it once, let them use it for their 3 months, then come back to me and I can give them another prepayment. Or if they need to come once a month, quarterly, we have been doing all of the above.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
Jane?
My question was, Kelly, you seem to think it was quite a lot of squish. And I'm just curious if there are parts of it that you think are too squishy that maybe we should, for Charlotte's benefit, tighten it up just a little bit.
I think she's capturing a lot of it right now, personally, Jane. I do think putting the timelines on it, at least up front, like setting a precedent of this is a 2-year process, 2-year grant, those kind of things, getting those contracts signed. I mean, these are all things that will make Charlotte's life less of a nightmare with this. So I think this is a really important move in the right direction. Again, I'm with Charlotte. I mean, I don't want to get too structured, but you do need some structure so everybody knows what's at the table. Thanks, Jane.
And for transparency's sake, I did contact Carl and Kelly in my first rendition of this just to get a gut check. So Kelly was able to help provide a little bit of this context. And that was just because of obviously Kelly's background in doing so much of this stuff that I wanted to see if I was being too harsh or not. So that is kind of where we are at. And I will defer to you guys. This was a lot of information we are trying to cram in for today. So if you're comfortable, you're welcome to take the motion. We also can hold this till the next meeting. As I said, it does not structurally make a difference for me as a staffing standpoint.
I'm not sure I can bear going through it again. Let's vote.
Thanks, Carl.
I'd be happy to make a motion. I move to amend the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund expenditure framework to include the sections as written on slides 17, 18, and 19 of the staff presentation provided to the OCRF Advisory Committee on September 12th, 2022.
And I am happy to second that.
All in favor? We got a good, it's all good.
Excellent.
Kelly, you're not on, so did you approved it, I presume, because you seconded?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I am good. Yeah. Yes.
Sorry, don't take that wrong. It's just, oh my God.
All right, well, I will go through the next sections pretty fast. I want to make sure that we do have time to complete this agenda, and it is a dense one. So a couple cool updates. So just so that everyone's aware, on your July 13th meeting, the OCRF board did move forward with a recommendation to bring forward to the ODFW Commission a recommendation to adjust our OARs. That's the line item, basically the 60-day requirement prior to a scheduled meeting. That does not mean that we are shortening any of our timelines. That means it gives us the flexibility to be more proactive and reactive if a special project particularly comes forward. So I will be presenting this recommendation to the ODFW Commission on September 16th to see if they would approve the adjustment of the OAR. As we have discussed this already, but I just wanted to provide people an update. This also just structurally really does help us. A new tracking system. So this is one of the things that I'm really excited for. We as the department are in the process of putting together the new Private Forest Accord grant program, scoping out the development of a new online grant system. This grant system, among some other things, will help streamline online applications by Google Forms. We'll be very excited. Being mindful that we don't want to be cumbersome to our applicants. So we're going to be extremely mindful that what we develop is user-friendly, software-friendly, as in doesn't need the most up-to-date versions of everything, or it will crash your computer, which happens a lot with granting systems. We also want to make sure that it's user-friendly for tracking. That would streamline a lot of what I've just discussed, and also incorporate the project and program monitoring information moving forward. We don't really have a place right now to help capture that. And that will be one of the things that we discuss later on about kind of thinking, what do we want to monitor and evaluate, and how do we build that into the back end of this new granting system? A lot of TBDs, but the good thing is that we're already scoping and it will be paid for out of the Private Forest Accord, so which is even better. So I'll pause and see if there's any questions for that. Okay, hearing none. Funding. I am going to pause for a second. It's 3:15. We are very behind on the agenda, but I do want to go through a little bit of this. But I would ask maybe the chair to see if you want to confirm if there's any public comment in addition to what we've already received.
I think that's fine. This is a good time to get that done. So are there anybody else in the audience have a comment to make?
Please feel free to raise your hand or just to unmute. This will be our formal public comment period, although it is delayed. Okay, hearing none, I will formally close public comment and obviously document what we've already received throughout the meeting. So I want to propose that I will spend the next few minutes going through our OCRF budget. Then we will make sure that we leave about 15 minutes to start the conversation of the evaluation and monitoring. This will not be our only opportunity to discuss this. And then we'll move into kind of the wrap up and meeting summary. Does that, work for the chair?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. So hopefully the OCRF members have had the ability to look through these funding slides. They're extremely dense, and apologies. This is just meant to be an overview, although a heavy one. So first thing I'm going to do is really kind of orient you first to what is the funding coming into the OCRF. And this part of the presentation will be divided into these 5 buckets. OCRF is obviously a public-private partnership, and we get many different sources of funds. And I will be going through these each individually. We get donations from the ODFW licensing sites. We get donations from the Oregon is Alive. We get directed donations, both restricted and unrestricted. We get a huge portion of our funds from the Oregon legislature, and we also get funds from what this bucket is other, and I'll describe that. So donations from the Oregon is Alive, or the ODFW licensing. So this is our electronic licensing system. This is from individuals that come and buy fishing license, hunting license, parking permits from our state lands. And this is from 2019 to 2021 with our June cutoff. And what I do want to say is obviously there's ebb and flow really associated with the purchase of tags and opening seasons. But we average from 2019 to 2021, roughly, as you can see, just shy of $10,000 a month. And we get a huge sum of money from this, just kind of starting. And this is really just from having a button on our, what we refer to as the ELS system. So for this biennium, so starting from July 2021 to currently, we're not all the way done. This kind of cumulative averages will continue until June 2023, but we're very similar. We are roughly just shy, I'm going to flip back, of 10,000 a month, still seeing that January peak. And so far this to date, we have had just over $125,000 come in from this site. And these are considered unrestricted donations. So this is in addition to all those other buckets that we have. And I'm going to continue. Please feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions, or you may hold them until the end. Next thing I want to talk about is our donations from the Oregon is Alive website. What we just talked about was our ELS website. OCRF has two websites, obviously the ones that are housed in ODFW, also the one that is hosted by the Oregon Wildlife Foundation. And that is this Oregon is Alive website. This donation, and this is cumulative since the website first appeared in 2020, you have just shy of $70,000 in that account. These accounts are held outside of the state funds, and they are unallocated and unrestricted funds. So that's $70,000 that you can utilize. And from January of 2022, so beginning of this year to current, you've had 16 separate donations, roughly $3,000 cumulatively. And this is without any sort of heavy pushing to this website and a very low social media presence at this time. So directed donations unrestricted, you have, of course my screen is half covered. This is what's basically from point of sale. So someone comes into an ODFW physical brick and mortar location to give a donation if they buy a tag in person, or small checks that have been actually mailed to us. And we do have quite a few of them from individuals that just write us a check and mail it. Roughly $6,000 have come in since December of 2021. And I do want to mention,
I had a quick question. This is Kelly. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I just had a quick question about the money coming in from the licensing fees. Is that a portion of the fee is like automatically goes to OCRF, or that's the part of your license where they say, do you want to donate to this, 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 or this?
Excellent question. It is the latter. It is the do you want to? OCRF is not funded by any obligatory fees associated with the license. It is optional individuals donating.
Very good. That's pretty impressive.
It is, and I have demographics on everybody that donates, and I've been able to kind of see like who is our average donor, what are they buying, what is their age, where are they from, and I'm kind of working through kind of wrapping that in up so that we can get a kind of a sense of like who is our average donor, what are they trying to do, and where are they interested.
Part of that too, Charlotte, as we should have a mailing list, and we need to celebrate our successes with all of our donors. We need to let them know where their money's going. You know, I think maybe there's the Trout Creek thing might be something worth addressing specifically, or just every time we have a funding round to let people know we're putting this money on the ground. I think that's really important.
Yes, absolutely. And that's definitely on my to-do list. We've done it, as you mentioned, in the past, and just highlighting projects we think that that group of our donors would be most interested in. And we have a lot of them. So I think kind of moving forward, there's an interest in making sure we do communications, specifically kind of getting some of these boilerplate email lists out so we can kind of drop a project and update so they know what they are helping to fund if they want to do that. Some of them opt out of those type of updates. So I do want to move on. So this was from December 2021. I do want to mention that I am using the December 2021 timeframe. And that kind of timeframe moving forward is because a lot of these kind of unrestricted donations were utilized for your last batch of match when you still had one. So this is kind of monies that are not already kind of restricted to something, not already used for your state match, and are kind of in your pockets ready to go. Just to kind of highlight some of the projects that you have received monies for. So since November 2021, you have helped fund a multitude of special projects. And this is the funding that was restricted large donations specifically to these projects. This is not counting the match. I have another slide for that. But you have brought in roughly $460,000 so far for these specific projects. So that is quite a bit. And you've had a really nice diversity of projects, now including that Trout Creek. Also, you've had quite a bit of money coming in through different general fund sources. So this $500,000, you can see my cursor on, these are really funds that you unlocked through donations. And that was where we were drawing that line in the December 2021. So prior to that was used for match for this to unlock that. After that is match you could hypothetically use if this match requirement came forward another time. You've also obviously had your first deposit of your drought funding. You'll have a second deposit later this year, and you've had your ARPA funds come through. A couple other things that are kind of interesting just to know is that you are actively getting interest on your accounts, roughly $9,000 of interest, but you also have other accounts. You have received a deposit for $90,000 out of your settlement account that is held by the Oregon Wildlife Foundation. So you have quite a bit of what could be considered a nest egg within that settlement account that's held by the Oregon Wildlife Foundation. And we've talked about that in the past. Those are funds that are outside of the ODFW accounts, but are allocated to the OCRF for your purposes. And just a pie chart, Carl, you mentioned you liked these, so I did put one in. Just to consider.
I love it. Thank you.
This is just to consider where your funds are coming in, and this is my last incoming slide. Obviously, legislative funds are over 70% of your allocations, but you, as a public-private partnership, roughly bring in about 1/3 that's not general fund related. Some of it is federal, some of it's not. But just kind of to think about the breakdown of different incoming funds and what you have available. So pause there. And I know I'm going through this very fast. It's more for your digestion and kind of thinking about things. We will do updates like this in the subsequent meetings.
Shar, this is great. Thank you very much for putting this together. And I'm trying to add things up. So this is July 2021 to current. So that's basically the biennium. And we have had donations here on this page of close to $700,000, $675,000. And now we just accepted $550,000. So we've hit our $1 million. Is that right?
Yes.
That isn't pretty amazing. Hey, so that's amazing on several levels. That part of this is we need to do something with that. It's to show that Oregonians care about the resource, and we have to somehow, I mean, it's not like we got to do this right this minute, but we need to think about ways to capitalize on that. That is a big deal. And we need to get it out there, whether ODF and W can do that, or whether we need to convene another media group. I mean, this is a big deal. We've raised $1 million. And that's the biennium is a little over half over. So, and if you add it all together, we raised 565,000 that first biennium. We're knocking on the door $2 million that we've raised. So anyway, just something for, I'm not expecting an action item on this, but we need to be thinking about it.
Yeah, it's great too, in terms of going into the legislative session and thinking about how to support ODF and W's POP 112, which is the OCRF one for the fund the position, as well as for the 3 million in general fund money. This will make the argument a lot stronger. So I think you're right. We need to think about how that'll get presented.
Yeah, that's great. Great news, God.
So Sarah has a good suggestion in the chat. You know, maybe at some point we do a press release, important milestone reached or something.
Something like that. Maybe, Charlotte, I know you got a lot on your plate, but I mean, Mark Labhart has his hand up.
Well, and even, you remember, Carl, I'm sure that when the legislature, we asked for the money up front, and they said, well, no, we want to see if you can put your money where your mouth is. And that's where the $1 million match came in. And we said, well, we're going to do that. And so I don't want to rub it in their face by any means, but, and of course, the legislature took that away, so we don't have to do that anymore. But it would be nice to say, we still went ahead and raised that $1 million, even though we didn't have to do that. So I think that's a huge positive too, is, even though it stopped, we still went ahead and raised the $1 million from private donations. And so that does exacerbate or tell exactly your message. What you said is, this is Oregonians stepping up and putting their money where their mouth is.
That's a big deal. That's a story. That's a story that somehow we have to figure out how to get out in a meaningful way. And we need to talk to Mauricio, get Mauricio on the case. But anyway, it's a big deal. I'm not going to minimize it. So thank you for putting that together.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe next steps is I will circle back with Mauricio, see if he has any ideas. Obviously, I can work internally with Sarah and maybe think about a press release, and kind of in the next couple of weeks come up with some ideas of what would be a really great way and a timely way to help celebrate this.
Lovely.
So moving on to our next batch, making sure we stay on track, is this is what you've raised. Now I want to give you an update of what you spent so you know what your balance is, because it's nice to know what you had come in, but you've already had a lot come out. So that's kind of where I do want to orient you. And I want to make sure that you are aware that we kind of have 3 buckets of how money comes out of the OCRF, which is just as important, if not more. We have our competitive grants, we have our special project requests, and we do, for better or for worse, have our operational expenses, and I will talk about that. So just to make sure that we are clear, so talking about your competitive grants, and these are just your competitive ones. So you'll notice similar table to what you saw before in your project updates, but the numbers are slightly different because I kind of pulled out your special project ones. So this cumulatively through your competitive grant cycle, all of the ones to date, you have spent over 1 million, just shy of 2 million. So 1.9 million dollars through your competitive grant cycle. You have also done a lot of special projects. So what you can see with this column is the first column is the donation. So what came in the door, then you have the full award. And I do want to make sure that the first 2 that you do see, there is a discrepancy with what the full award is. The first large number is what you physically have awarded. And then there's the pre-authorized, and that's a little bit of a weird thing. When OCRF started, what you did is you pre-authorized 2 projects to have up to that award ceiling. Those grants have not brought in all their donations yet. So that's why you can see that those numbers are different. The bottom 2 projects I do just want to highlight because they were technically in your last biennium, but they do help show kind of your money's in, money's out. So these projects are not counted towards your total, but just so you know that they were done in this other time frame. What does talk to your total is with, and you can see those 2 other grants just disappeared because they're not calculated here. Your cumulative expenses towards your special projects is $600,000. And that's when you kind of tally up what's in this column here. Obviously, does not include Trout Creek because you had not approved it at this time. And it is only your large numbers, not your pre-authorization numbers. So that's why those numbers do vary a little bit. But to date, you've spent this red value. So kind of making sure that everyone's aware, there's also supplies and salary. This is what's been budgeted for the, as Commissioner Lockhart mentioned, my position right now, which is temporary. So if that POP doesn't go through, as Sarah mentioned, there's going to be some contingency planning and whatnot. But for 18 months of having this position exist, the budget was $181,000. Obviously, that would go up for a full biennium to account for things. But you do, one thing I do want to mention is that you do have some money for an upcoming meeting. So we have plenty of funds available to make sure we get you to your meeting and that you have a good meeting structurally. And just to highlight, 90,000 of this came from private donations, and then it was supplemented by the department, obviously with ODFW commission approval. So what do you have in your coffers? So this is just an overview of the available funds that you have to consider. You have just shy of $70,000 in Oregon is Alive. You have just shy of $1 million within your ODFW settlement. And currently available within your funds is you have $2.3 million. Once you get your second drought funding package, which will come most likely in December of this year, you will have that $4.8 million. Obviously, that $4.8 million does not account for any other ELS or other donations that you have. And this value does not count for supplies and salary. That money is kept separately. So I am going to pause and see if there's any questions. I know I went through that very fast.
Charlotte, I asked you to do this, and this is really nice, really helpful. Thank you for putting this together. We ought to kind of have this recurring, you know, it doesn't have to be as detailed, but like every meeting, we should just get this number up in front of everybody. It's just really helpful. For clarification for me, so we're looking at available funds. As you have, you did the accounting, the expense side. Is the expense side of the funds that we promised but haven't spent yet from the last funding round, or any of the projects, does this number include, have you subtracted from this all of the funds we promised for our projects?
Absolutely.
Yes.
So the way that I calculate this is it's not only what you physically spent, but I count what you have allocated. So this is available funds for you to look at.
So we have $2.3 million in available funds, and we'll shortly have plus the other, and then we will have 4.8 million.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
And if you think about it just on the surface, that makes sense because you had 5 million for drought and you 1 million for ARPA. You spent your ARPA money already.
Yeah.
So in all of your other special projects kind of averaged out to what you were getting through your ELS donations. So you are pretty much on track for this to basically have your drought funding available, which remember does not actually expire at the end of the biennium.
All right. Boy, this is great. We're in a great position.
You
We're in a
are in a
great-
very good position, but just make sure that there is a little bit of strategic planning moving forward, that $3 million that is in your policy option package is not fully approved. So you need to think about
Correct.
moving forward. How do you want to continue in case that number changes?
Yeah.
So Charlotte, if I understand it, then if we have 2 more grant cycles in this biennium, the one that's out now, and then we'll have another one in the spring. And if we do roughly 20 projects at 50,000, that'll commit another 2 million. So at the end of the biennium, we'd have somewhere along the order of 2.8 million of the ODF and W funds still available, plus the 910.
Yes. And that's where moving forward for the subsequent rounds, you can kind of strategically plan. Do you want to potentially fund some larger special projects? Do you want to increase the amount that you provide to your single RFPs? There's many different funding models that I might kind of bring forward to help think about this. There's also what's referred to as a seed leaf program, where if you get one of the small programs, it opens the door for a large program, similar to a special project, but still competitive. So there's kind of multitude of different ways that you can think about this, and also be potentially strategic with holding a little bit of that back so that you have enough money to continue moving forward. Because even if your 3 million comes forward in your policy option package in June, you're going to be running another RFP in that August time. So you're going to want $1 million to have ready and prepared there, even though it's in your next biennium, to kind of help carry through till your next funding.
Well, just on a preliminary run through of this, it sounds like it wasn't exactly arbitrary that we picked $1 million, but $1 million per RFP sounds about right going forward.
I think though, as you, Charlotte, indicated, there's some opportunity to think about. We want to hold over $1 million maybe for that August, the first August in the next biennium, but that still leaves 1.5, 1.8 to think about how to leverage or be creative maybe sooner rather than later. Or there's an opportunity to think about it that way anyway.
Well, if we have 2 more, we have 2 more funding rounds, right? Oh, okay, that we got this one that we're in. So is it 1 or how many more funding rounds in this biennium?
2 in this biennium. So you will have the current one, and then you will have your winter, but then the biennium will end in June.
Okay, so that's 2, if we do $1 million each, that's $2 million that we still have, that's 2 million, we'll still have $3.8 million, including
Yes.
the settlement.
Which you would want at least 1 million for your fall of 2023, just so you're prepared to immediately run it. But yes, right
then
now
we would
you're in
have-
a comfortable position.
Yeah, we're in a good position. I mean, I don't think, unless anyone has another thought, I don't think we need to adjust that number. I think $1 million feels pretty good. It's a substantial number, and we're not being profligate by doing it. You could even, I'm not making this argument, but you could argue we could do more. We could, and still be pretty safe on the budget. But again, this allows us some cushion if we keep it like this, if we weren't successful with the POP or only got a portion of it. So I'm thinking $1 million sounds about right.
And we can always move at your upcoming meeting. We can, apologies, I'm just reading a message really fast. We can kind of think strategically about how you want to do that and how you move your funding structure. But I think, as you mentioned, Carl, you're in a good spot. We don't want to keep money in the coffer that we don't need to keep there. We want to get it out to the communities in a timely, efficient manner, especially the drought funds. But we also want to make sure that we are really thinking about this of how do we make sure we leverage and keep funds moving forward the best that we can.
Great, Charlotte. Thank you. Thank you very much for putting this together. This was really helpful.
All right. Are there any other questions about this? I mean, I know you probably have some. I know I went through this fast, but hopefully this is a good starting place. Okay, so with none, I might change my format slightly, stop sharing my screen. And I would propose that we spend the next 15 minutes talking about monitoring and evaluation, just teeing up maybe next steps and how we're going to move forward with that and why that's so important. And with Carl, you as the chair, opening that up. And then we can do a wrap up pretty fast with about 5 minutes to spare. So we will stop this next conversation at about 3:55.
Great. I think, again, I think we've talked a little bit about this. I think this is important and we're going to need to spend some time on it. I think we can just use these few minutes. I'd like to hear people's thoughts on monitoring. Just to refresh everyone's memory, when we first wrote our policies and expenditure framework, we dedicated 5%. And of course, we haven't budgeted. We should put that in the budget, Charlotte, as a budget item. We allocated 5% of the money we spent for monitoring. And that's not just the reports that the entities are required, and that is something we can tune up, I believe, in what we require. And I think Charlotte's talked about that a little bit, where we can formalize the reporting. This is more of the active going back and looking at what we've done or what our recipients have done and find out what's working and what's not working. It's not real clear. There's a lot of different ways. There's qualitative monitoring and there's quantitative monitoring. When I was on the OWEB board, we hired an entity that's their job. They went out and monitored projects. And what my takeaway from my experience on OWEB is they hadn't done that from the beginning. And they were going back and tasking this group of trying to figure out the outcome of projects that were done 20 years before. And so I don't want to be in that position. I think we need to start this. As you saw, we've got 31 projects that are done. So we can start that now and have more real-time information. So I don't have a preconceived idea of how to go about it. One, of course, is to engage in a company that does just that. That's what they do. But I'm really interested in hearing ideas on that from everybody on the committee.
I think it's tough. This is Kelly. Personally, monitoring is, from our behalf, it is a very expensive process, depending on how you're doing it. Not a lot of people want to fund it, but they all want to know what the numbers are. And 5%, likely may not cover a quantitative monitoring project, depending on what it is. So I think I just feel like it depends on what we're after. Do we need to report to someone and let them know that, these projects are scientifically based and they're moving forward and we've got the data to prove that what we're doing is working? Or is our group more focused on making sure people who want to move projects towards conservation and recreation, are those the right people sitting at the table? Or are we inviting everyone to sit at the table and more of a qualitative, monitoring to help push this forward statewide in all areas with all communities? So I really think we need to ask ourselves first what our question is and who we need to report to, and that will sort of direct the type of information or data or story collecting. Maybe it's storytelling that we want to collect as far as monitoring goes. So that's what I would propose for us to do, maybe workshop it a little bit.
Yeah, Kelly, thank you for those comments. And I tell you who I see as our audience is us. Is telling us, oh, well, that project didn't go anywhere. It didn't achieve anything that we thought it might. And here's why. That it's to tell us so that when we're going down the road, we're able to inform how we choose projects. But I also really like your idea about it's part of storytelling. And OWEB tried to do that as they were monitoring. They said, well, let's try to tell a story. So, and one last comment on yours, you said that 5% is not enough. And in fact, it is not enough. We picked 5% because it was the low end of the range that we researched this and said, what does it take to monitor? And it was 5 to 15%. And we picked 5 because we didn't know where we were going to go. We can always change that. But I think 5 is a good start, and maybe will point out to us what the inadequacies are. So thank you. That's the kind of workshopping and brainstorming we need to do maybe at our upcoming meeting.
And if I may, before Mark, I apologize for jumping in, but to Kelly's point, the OCRF also does have a legislative obligation to report report to the Oregon legislature. So once a year, and Davia has done this for you in the past, and I will have one prepared for you by hopefully a draft of some ideas by the next meeting, and something for you really to sink your teeth into by November, is that you do need to actually provide documentation to the Oregon legislature once a year of what you've been doing. So this evaluation really would be a key kind of component you could build into this moving forward as another audience for such a messaging tool.
Mark, you got any thoughts on this?
Well, I'm kind of milling on it. Kelly gave a lot of good points and things to consider. I think it's sort of a range of, how effective were the projects? What do we learn from that in terms of what we want to fund? What are the parameters that may influence whether projects are successful or not? Are there things we can do differently to make projects more successful? And then I think also the reporting out and storytelling, being prepared to tell our story and publicize the success of what we've done is just really important. And, as Charlotte references, the legislative session isn't really that far away at this point. And that's when we need to really be prepared to, one of the times we need to be really prepared to tell that story. So I think it's something we ought to think about sooner rather than later, at least for some parts of it. And if you think about 5%, it's not a lot. On the other hand, if we're doing 2 million a biennium, that's whatever that is, 100,000. If we're doing 4 million a biennium, that's 200,000. So there's a lot of room there to do something with a report or contracting with someone to help us do it.
So that, I think, Charlotte, when we're formulating our in-person session, this ought to be a part of that discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point, Carl, and to Mark's, contracting is most likely the best way for us to go. And I've already internally started the process of figuring out how would we get a contractor? What is the process for us? What would roughly our budgets be? And then continuing this conversation in our October meeting and hopefully wrapping it up and really having a good time to sink our teeth into it in our November meeting, to then after the November actually release our RFP, so that we are, although we might not have that information right in line with the legislative session when they're making considerations, we have started that ball rolling. We can get some preliminary information and show that we are very deliberate with making sure that we are evaluating ourselves. But to your point, Carl, it's definitely on our to-do list, which is why please don't change your November plans, because I need that date.
Any other comments on this topic?
Well, I was thinking whether I should weigh in or not, but I think both Kelly and Mark kind of captured it. It's kind of like a matter of scale. The first scale is you have to cross the bar of saying, did you spend the money as you said you were going to? So that's almost a given. But I'm thinking of looking at Jane here right now. But you could let's use pond turtles for example. You fund a pond turtle project to create habitat. So you jump that hurdle, say, yes, we did create the habitat. The next step is, well, do you want to know, did it produce so many more pond turtles? Well, that's a lot of monitoring, and that's probably several years worth of monitoring to say the next scale was, well, did it produce 14 more pond turtles, or, say you got to be careful, what you're asking for, because it can get really expensive. Or did you produce so many more fish as a result of that? But it's tough to figure out how to monitor. We took kids out into the forest for their first time, and they got to do some stuff, and they got to recreate, and they learned about nature, and they learned about conservation, and they learned about caring for the environment. Well, how do you measure that? How do you monitor that? So it's just a matter of scale on what you want to monitor. So yeah, I agree. It's probably some more discussion at the in-person meeting about what level you want to be at. So I don't think the legislature is going to ask for, well, how many more pond turtles did you get as a result of that? They just want to know, did you spend the money the way you said you were going to? And we assume, because it was a good project, that it will produce so many more fish or pond turtles or whatever. That's my ramble.
Thanks, Mark. I'll reiterate too that, again, a big audience is us, and I want to even just go what we found at OEB. They went back and looked at projects, and the project was done but not maintained. For instance, like the fencing project. Oh, great project! They did it. They fenced, and the quantitative thing was great. 17 miles of stream. You go back and monitor it, and it's all falling down. and so you have to. Those are the kind of things. And then so you come back and say, why? What was it about this person or this entity that didn't maintain it, or maybe we didn't contract it the right way? Those are the kind of things in this early stage we need to kind of figure out if we're actually getting money on the ground, if it's actually doing what we thought it was supposed to do. Because, a lot of this is just a black box. We just had a great report from Hika Baby, and that's that's not a permanent thing, but we've done a lot of habitat work and infrastructure work, like the Gilchrist fence. Is it still up? Do they have numbers on the number of deer? Have they, I've monitored it myself because I drive by it and there's always a dead deer right at the end of the fence every time. So that's one way to monitor. Okay, well, that's great. I think, we're certainly not going to solve anything, but it tees it up to have a good conversation. Again, that's a great thing to talk about when we're all in the same room. So Charlotte, do you want to move on to the wrap up?
Yeah, that would be great. And I'm just trying to pull up my slides. I seem to have lost them, but basically what I want to go through next is just some wrap up for what we are going to kind of see coming up and some of the to-dos. I think instead of messing with my screen, I'm just going to kind of read through these. They are in your slide packet that you have. And we do have some upcoming things for our consideration. First thing we just talked about is the evaluation and the monitoring. And the first step is really going to be kind of internal and external. We want you as the OCRF members to really think about what scale and information would you want? What scale and information do we think others would want? Who is kind of our audience, us and others, just us? Remember, this will be the first of hopefully many evaluation and monitoring kind of processes we go through. So think about what's a good first step, what's a long-term step as you think about that. And then I'll be working with our contracting team to make sure that we do what we need procedurally. We have our money, we set our budgets, we start scoping out how would we do this process and how fast the process takes. Another thing just to think about is we've talked a little bit already about communication and storytelling. Would this monitoring really want to feed into some sort of longer term communications thoughts? What would be our short-term communication needs and long-term? So that's something coming up. Another big thing is Nature of Oregon event. Do we want to continue that? How do we continue that? What would we adjust? So at the October meeting, I would like to kind of start this process of how would we, or could we move that forward? That Nature of Oregon proclamation is going to need to go in front of our new executive branch once that has been appointed, and the new governor for consideration. So how would we move that forward? Can we make sure that the coalition members that help move that forward are still interested in how would we do that? Yearly report, already talked about that. I'm going to start kind of making our draft of what I would put into one and have you guys help me, obviously, with what you would want into that. What are the goals? What are the metrics if we have them? Spend plans, we already started quite a bit, but thinking about, as Mark mentioned, do we want to maybe be any little creative, like with some of our funds? Do we have special projects we might want to do? How do we budget in these solicitations? Do we need to increase the amount we spend or not? So thinking about that moving forward. And the last one, which is kind of a good thing, is the Portland Harbor settlement is still kind of potentially in play for the OCRF. And we've heard updates from Shonda Ferrari before at ODFW, is that potentially would be some funding that would partner with the with OCRF to help get put out in the community. That would not be most likely till fall or winter of 2023, but that is something upcoming that we can always keep on our radar so it doesn't drop off. But my last kind of thing before I pass it to Carl for closing remarks is, please do not lose that November meeting date for in-person. I know it does conflict with a couple of you already, but we have a date. I know it's Tuesday. It's super awkward in the middle of the week, but please keep it. Because I think that you guys operate amazingly virtually, but it's really going to be beneficial to have you all together. And then with that, I apologize for the volume of content for this meeting, but we got through it. So I'll pass it to Carl to close us out.
Yeah, Charlotte, thank you so much for putting that together. Some of that stuff was pretty dense. And while what I did during that is I just perused a recent National Geographic. Wow, it was great. So Srishti knows what that's
Is it because you are featured, Carl? Maybe that has something to do with it.
Yeah, that might be. I'm in this issue. That's pretty cool. So we definitely need to get together in November and look forward to that. And once again, I'm really happy with the committee. I'm really happy about the Trout Creek thing. That's really a big deal. The numbers that Charlotte put up, just we need to tell that story a little better. And I really appreciate all the work that you all have done to get us to where we are today. And Charlotte has really gone beyond in the amount of work she's put in and tuning this up so we can be successful going forward. So thank you all very much. All right, great. So
Thanks, Carl. Thanks, Charlotte. Thanks all.
The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.